Thank you.
Thank
For our
you.
Kentucky School Summit, we are going to have around 400 people today. So this is so exciting. We have a lot of virtual participants. We have several that are going to be in person. And so first, I want to give a shout out to all of our regional cooperatives, because without you all and your collaboration, your leadership, this for sure would not be possible and be as successful for all of our school counselors for around the whole state. So you can see on my slides, we have a few different ways you can tweet out about our training today in the morning and in the afternoon with ASCA, School Counselors for MTSS, and of course there's our hashtag for our summit. So make sure to send pictures, anything you want, just to really spotlight what we're doing here in Kentucky. And in the chat, I have added your form for your attendance. So if you could please fill that out. You've already registered, but we also need you to fill out the Google form just to make sure you're here. And I'll keep adding that as we go along today to make sure you get your ELA credit, because if you stay all day, you will get 6 hours today. So please make sure you fill that out and we will get that sent to your cooperative. So first, happy National School Counselor Week. This is very exciting. This is our week that we get to celebrate, but it also highlights what we do in our profession, which we know the more people know and are educated about what school counselors are really supposed to be doing in our schools, it's only going to benefit all of our students. So anything you can do this week to shout out yourself, your programs, how you are meeting your students' needs, how you're collaborating with your stakeholders. Today's theme is being a school counselor is a dream come true because. So in the chat, if you would like to quickly share, how would you finish that sentence? Being a school counselor is a dream come true because. These are all great. I see a lot about student-centered answers, which is amazing. Building relationships, helping them succeed in all different areas, which we know we have to do. Yeah, this is amazing. I love that it's so student driven, which is of course what we want to be doing as school counselors. All right, well, thank you all for that. And like I said, make sure that you're tweeting out. And I really do hope that this is a week that you can advocate for your profession and your role that within your school building. Okay, so couple housekeeping things, and then we're going to get right into it. Just remember on your Zoom, if you could please rename yourself just to make sure we see your full name and your regional cooperative. That will help us be able to just know where you're from. If you ask questions, we're going to go into breakout rooms several times today, and those are going to be by your levels, elementary, middle, and high school, based on your last name. So when we get to that point, we'll show you which breakout room you need to join, and that will be your breakout room for the entire day. So just keep that in mind, and you will get to collaborate with a lot of other school counselors from all around the state. So you won't just be specifically for your co-op today. You'll be with everybody, which is exciting because sometimes we don't get to see what other people are doing in other regions. So I think that's going to be awesome to collaborate that way. And please use the chat for any questions, any comments. Like I said, we're going to have around 400 people, so we want to make sure we do get to your questions. So please put those in the chat and we'll be monitoring that as well. And I think that's all I had right now for this morning. All right, Jennifer, are you and Jake ready?
We are so ready. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to be here. Just feel honored to get to spend the second day of National School Counselors Week with all of you. So yeah, let's jump in. Jake, you ready for this?
Ready.
I mean, we were born ready. So let me share my screen and let's just see how and whether I actually share the correct screen and whether you can see all of the things that I see. How does this look?
Looks great.
Excellent. So welcome, everyone. We are going to jump in and get started once I can figure out how to make my slides move, which we will do right now. So Jake and I are here to talk about comprehensive school counseling programs and MTSS alignment, building tiered systems. We are so excited to get to talk about something that we absolutely love. to share with school counselors from around the country. So right here, what we have
Now it's that
is,
screen.
I'm just gonna,
Yeah, all of us listening to it's gonna be difficult.
Jennifer, I'm sorry. Everyone on the call, if you could please make sure that you have muted yourself. We're having trouble hearing our speakers.
Oh, okay. Well, who wants to do the sound?
Yeah, just somebody.
I think we have
Mine went off.
cooperatives who are just getting themselves organized, which is fantastic.
I know, it's so exciting. They are amazing to work with. Okay.
All right,
Sounds
How
like
we
we're good to
feeling?
go. Sorry.
excellent. I love seeing these big rooms of people. Welcome everyone who are in big rooms, and welcome everyone who are in your own solitary spaces. Welcome. Jake and I are welcoming you here. We have a QR code, and we also have a way for you to keep in touch with us should you wish to. So if you would like to receive our newsletters, which we send out quarterly, any materials that we have, research that's ongoing, feel free to use that QR code. On one of the next slides, I have a way for you to even just sign up. But first, we're going to introduce ourselves because we don't know all of you. We know some of you from our work. I'm Dr. Jennifer Betters-Buban. I'm an associate professor, program coordinator at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, so not too far from Kentucky. I am a former elementary school counselor of 12 years and a former special education teacher. And in the course of becoming a school counselor, I was like, there must be some more ways we can intervene with students. And that's when I went to get my PhD in educational psychology. And I've been working at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater with future clinical mental health and school counselors since 2012. Love the work that I do. Jake, do you want to introduce yours? Oh, and you can see my Packer fan.
What is it?
So I even put it up there despite our season. Oh, there it is. Jake, how
Hey,
about
good morning,
you?
everyone. Yeah, so good to be with you and see where everybody's from.
It's
I'm
Bushelman.
Dr. Jake Olson. I'm at Cal State Long Beach here in Long Beach, California. Originally from Seattle, Washington, was a school counselor up there, elementary. Went to North Carolina, did some high school work there, and that's where I got my PhD. So about as close to Kentucky as I got, was in the North Carolina area, Charlotte. And for me, coming to this work, similar to Jen, actually, as a school counselor, I was coordinating and leading a lot of the MTSS work for our district and building, and got to do a lot of district level work there. So I'm just excited to bring, both the experience doing it like you all are, and also just we get to do some awesome research and training around this stuff to be able to bring stuff from around the nation to help folks out. So super excited to be with you. Thanks for having us.
So we are both part of a collaborative called School Counselors for MTSS. We came together. All of us are involved in school counseling in some way. So you can see your very own Damian Sweeney. Shout out to Damian for all the work that he has done in Kentucky. We all came together in various ways over the last 10 or so years to create better systems for school counselors, both in how we train school counselors and in helping school counselors who are on the ground do their work efficiently, effectively, streamlining it and really aligning it. So you can see we've written 3 books: The School Counselor's Guide to Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. We've got a brand new edition of that book coming out this summer. We're really, really excited about the updates post-pandemic to that. Of course, Making MTSS Work, and Natalie Edermana-Singa and her colleagues wrote Culturally Sustaining School Counselors. We love this field. And you all are the reason why we do this work. So this is just a little bit of who we are. You can find us on a variety of platforms, so feel free to tag us in any of your Twitter posts today. We love to stay active, and we love to connect with school counselors. So feel free to follow us and stay in touch. So what is our focus for today? Of course, we have to acknowledge National School Counseling Week, which I know we've already done, but we're going to do it again. And this is our plan for the next 3 hours that we have together. We're going to provide an overview of MTSS, just generally the alignment, highlighting your wonderful afternoon, kind of the model that will be coming out in Kentucky, providing some information about Tier 1 and some examples in case that's where you are. We know all of you are coming to us from different spaces in terms of your MTSS work. And then we're going to, the bulk of our time is really going to be focused on Tier 2. And so I'm really thankful Jake is here, because Jake is just our Tier 2 everything. Jake presents on this all the time. And he's really kind of curated some materials that have been helpful for teams to streamline how they think about Tier 2 and how they systematize how they're doing that work. And so we'll go back and forth thinking about Tier 2 generally, teaming, data, evidence-based supports, progress monitoring, and then we'll end the day kind of thinking about moving ahead to Tier 3. We've got breakout rooms planned, and so we really want to make sure that this time is helpful to all of you and that you have time to talk and process, not just sit and get. So that's our plan. Jake, anything to add about that?
No, I think that was great. Just excited to get into it.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you to all of you for the work you do. And I actually wanted to go back to yesterday to find out, I know Heather had asked the question of the day, like, why is this your dream job? I want to, and we want to know how you help students, or for you to really, in this moment, think about a student that you have impacted, maybe this month, this year, sometime in your experience as a school counselor. So in the chat, how do you help students? How have you helped students? Who comes to mind? What do you do? Let's just see a few in the chat. If you're in one of the big breakout spaces, feel free to turn to a colleague and share that student that has influenced your work. You don't have to utilize the chat function in the same way as people who are in the solely virtual space. Building resilience through connection, being consistent, being that person, building relationships. Absolutely. Christine is saying, helping our students complete their college applications and getting into college, emotional support, self-advocacy. Ooh, I see always showing up for him. So there's a specific student that you're thinking about. And Dustin, helping students grieve, which we know is has been even more important in the last 3 years, especially seeing, as Brittany said, we have students who have lost parents or grandparents or loved ones to COVID. So collaborative problem solving, love that. Identifying barriers, being that safe person. Amy, thank you. Being a builder of hope. I love it. This is not an easy job, just given what we see and what we hear and what we do each and every day. And so thank you for continuing to show up. Thank you, Elizabeth, for doing that morning meditation with those few students who are exhibiting anxiety, just being present. So thank you all. Thanks for engaging in the chat. You can keep those coming as we dive into what we're going to do today. So let's get to it and think about MTSS. So we always like to start our presentations with a reminder, because when we're talking about building systems takes time. And so you can all take a look at this graphic and think about, where am I? Where is our school in this MTSS development? We know some of you are coming, and maybe you're the loan shark and you're trying to figure it out, and you're bringing MTSS to your districts, and you're saying, well, we don't have it in place, but I'm going to start climbing this mountain, and I want to gain some support. So maybe after today, you bring this information and you share it with an administrator or a school psychologist or a social worker or a fellow counselor or a teacher who's really passionate. You say, this is what I'm learning about. Would you want to get started in doing some Tier 1 work with me? We know some of you, and I think I saw on Twitter the other day, so one of the collaboratives that was just meeting about MTSS already. So you're in this infrastructure, you're trying some things out. We know through implementation science, it takes a number of years for for MTSS to be solidly in place, 3 to 5 years really. And so give yourself some grace as you move toward full implementation. Take it one small step at a time. So as you leave today, don't think, oh my gosh, I've got to build an entire system. I've got to get an entire team together. There are small steps that you can take. And so we want you to really try to grab a hold to those small steps, because that's what's going to get you to the top. Otherwise, you're just going to be standing admiring like how you can't get to this next step, or lamenting how you can't get to this next step. So that's just our reminder to you. Another way of looking at this is really thinking about where you are in terms of what year. Exploration, are we starting to get involved in this process in years 2 or 3, or years 4 and 5? Are we in full implementation? So just note, right? You get to be where you are. And so take whatever information is helpful to you today. If some of it's overwhelming, go back to the stuff that's not. Okay. And we're trying to meet the needs of 300 plus folks. And so we're going to give you a lot of different stuff, lots of resources in our Google folder for you to kind of take even later as you move toward full implementation. So just to make sure we all start out in the same place and space, what is MTSS? It's that integration of multiple tiered systems. So we're really integrating all of the things that we do into one coherent, strategically combined system that addresses many different domains or content areas in education. So many of us are used to seeing the triangle along the bottom, where we have core instruction, we have targeted small group, we have intensive individual instruction, and a lot of our work, what we see is that those triangles are still divided into an academic side and a social and emotional or behavioral side. And really in strong MTSS, it really is the umbrella that focuses on the whole child. We may have some specific systems to intervene specifically with academic or behavioral, but what we want to make sure that we're doing is really not only focusing on one side of the triangle, and really thinking about students as full individuals. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we cannot ignore the impact of the social emotional on our students. So we need to know that. What we know is that MTSS has really has come from that academic RTI that so many of us who've been in the school since the 2000s will remember. The academic RTI side, as well as MTSS-B, as it's sometimes called in different states, is informed by PBIS. And so what we know is that both of these there's a lot of overlap in that what we want to do within MTSS is use interventions that are based, that we know work. And Jake will be talking about some evidence-based tier 2 interventions later. We want to use instruction as prevention. So not only academic core instruction, but the social emotional piece. How are we building a culture that is grounded in health and wellness for our students as well as for our staff? We build that continuum of support. We have some screening, not only for academic, but for social emotional. When students aren't succeeding, we have some ways in which we can problem solve through that on a team so that we're not just using Band-Aid approaches. And we're always looking at how we're implementing things and improving it. And so MTSS isn't an add-on. It should be something that is focused on at the district level and at the school level, that this is part of the plan. I'll talk a little bit about my story later on, and really that was a game changer, was when our administrators really focused in on this is just as important. And so that's what we're going to focus on. Of course, we love our research. We know some practitioners are like, yes, research is important, and I'm not going to read an article. So guess what? We have summarized it for you. We know that when MTSS is implemented with fidelity, it leads to good stuff for staff, for students, and for families. So reduction in discipline problems, fewer problems with mental health, reduction in how teachers are reporting bullying and how students are getting along. Staff tend to stay in systems that have systems that where they can see how things are being addressed. There's some consistency. They know what's expected of them. In terms of the students, better academics, better attendance, safety, the organization runs better, and teachers feel better about what they're doing. And so the end game that sometimes administrators like to hear about is that there's a cost savings because we're more efficient, we're more effective. Also, what MTSS can help us with, as educators, we know there's so many initiatives. MTSS helps us organize them because we can think then, oh, how are our trauma-informed practices organized for all, some, and few students? How are we organizing SEL or our safety curriculum? So we like to think about how do we organize all of these different initiatives, and where is the overlap within our overall MTSS system? If we think about all of these within, mental health, serving undocumented, college and career readiness, school violence and prevention, all of our anti-racist and culturally sustaining efforts, we can think of these across tiers. So instead of having these siloed initiatives, we can bring them together within our tier 1, especially. Final reminder about MTSS is that we don't use it as another way to label. We don't use it to say, oh, now we've got these tier 2 and tier 3 kids, who's going to deal with them? We recognize that students have a variety of needs, and sometimes those needs are going to be met through the universal tier 1 curriculum, and sometimes they're going to need additional support in tiers 2 and tiers 3. So this student, all good with peer interaction, homework, literacy, great. Needing more targeted supports in math attendance and some more intensive supports related to problem solving and anger. So this student is not a tier 3 student. This student is a student with some needs that cross all tiers of support. Whew. So that is MTSS. Now, we know, so our group has come together because of a shared love for just seeing how we know that the tier supports are interwoven with school counselors. So even on our website, we have this lovely graphic because we're like, yes, school counseling, when school counselors become involved in MTSS, we can have a better purpose, we're more efficient, we build capacity, and we can create more equitable outcomes through collaboration. This is what we love. And so a lot of our work has been related to, and this is from our book, Making MTSS Work, looking at how the Ask a National model really aligns with MTSS programs. I mean, and you can just see it, like it just makes sense. And in fact, that's how Peg and I met so long ago at a conference where I asked a question about the Ask a model. When are we going to start to integrate MTSS and PBIS into this? And she came over to me after, she's like, this is my thing too. This is what I love. And that really started our work together. So this afternoon, you all are going to get an opportunity to think about the Kentucky School Counseling Multi-Tiered System of Supports Implementation Model. That is awesome. And so I'm so excited for you all to have this model that has both school counseling and multi-tiered system support in it. It's awesome. It's great. So I'm very excited for you. This is a resource we have available. It's on our website. It's not in the purple. This is also from our book where we just took MTSS and the Ask a National model, and we said, okay, how does that translate into the tiers? And then how does that translate into what we do across the tiers, right? We define MTSS and school counseling that's grounded in mindsets and behaviors. We have a shared vision for our school counseling program and our MTSS teams that we have. Then we deliver in concert with the MTSS teams our culturally sustaining interventions. We do assessment. I mean, it absolutely just makes sense. One of our colleagues, Emily Goodman Scott, has done a lot of qualitative research talking with school counselors. And so they say things like MTSS and school counseling are intertwined together, helping them support the school's mission. It's not like school counselors over here, and we have our own agenda and the rest of the school is doing their own thing. we're supporting the mission of the school. So it really brings people together in a collaborative way. Another school counselor mentioned the things that the MTSS teams are looking to implement. Those are the things that we school counselors do. We got to be at the table, you all, because it's what we do. Now, one question we get often is in the ASCA delineation of our role of appropriate and inappropriate duties. And so a lot of times school counselors will say, but look at right here. It says that we shouldn't coordinate school-wide individual education plans, 504 plans, student study teams, response to intervention plans, MTSS, and school attendance review boards. Okay, we shouldn't be coordinating the entire system. Okay, that's too much for any one person. What we should be doing is playing a role in MTSS. We can be a tier 1 leader. We can lead a tier 1 MTSS team. And in fact, that goes along with our role. We can play a role on the tier 2 team. We absolutely have a role to play, and we don't have to be it, right? It's not like someone's going to tag us and be like, okay, this is all yours. That's not how MTSS works anyway. And we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration and teaming, because this is a school-wide effort. So don't get confused. You absolutely have a role to play. You just can't do it all. Okay. In your resources, we included the most recent ASCA position statement about what our role is. And so if you need further definition, or if you want to bring this to an administrator or a team member, it outlines that we are stakeholders, and that we align our work. And even more than that, this is the role that we play. We provide school counseling instruction. We identify research-based interventions. We evaluate and assess. We do progress monitoring. So all of these things, we have it outlined, and ASCA has helped to delineate that further. Okay, we're going to get into tier 1, and we're going to think about what it is, just as an overview, and maybe you'll leave with a few ideas of what we're really talking about, and how to even shore up that initial tier, which is really, really important. So what we know about tier 1, right? Tier 1 is all about school climate. What is the culture and climate that we are creating in our school related to safety, the relationships? How are we supporting teaching and learning? And even just that environment. That's all tier 1. Often we think about CASEL's social emotional competencies, right? How are we as school counselors contributing to this? Doesn't necessarily mean we have to be teaching everything, because we know that SEL should be integrated into what teachers are teaching and doing. That's K-12. I know high school counselors, that gets to be a lot trickier. And I still am talking to you, because there are ways that, and I'll give you some examples in just a second of how we can make that happen. So we're thinking about this, and we're thinking about the systems that we have. We just shared this on our social media the other day, and it's like it's going. Because tier 1 is how do we systematically build this in? Our team recently decided to spend the first 10 minutes of meetings sending positive emails home. 10 out of 10 recommend. It's always in my list. I don't get around to it as much as I'd like. Building it into our structured team time was a great solution. It means so much to students. We're building the culture and climate, but we also have a system for doing so. It's not just, let's add one more thing to the list. Let's create a system for how we're going to make that happen. So this is tier 1. And here's what we know. It doesn't matter the interventions that we have. You can't intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem. You just can't. It's not possible. So as you think about your tier 1, as you think about how you address not only student, but staff, kind of what's underneath the surface. In the chat, how would you say you're doing? Maybe a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being really solid, really strong, addressing student and staff kind of tier 1 needs. 3 kind of in the middle. 1, you got some work to do. There's no judgment, just in the chat, how would you say you're doing related to tier 1? It's a really powerful video, Karen. We're happy to provide the link to it. Yes, it relates to invisible backpack. I see a lot of 2s and 3s. some 4s. So some people who are kind of moving up, like maybe we do. I think one of the most powerful things about this video is that it does get at the staff piece, which I think we often forget about, related to SEL and our tier 1. So thank you. Keep those responses coming, and continue to think like this is the why, right? The why for our tier, for creating these tiers. This is it. Okay. So we think about tier 1, there are kind of 5 things that really should be in place. Shared beliefs and expectations, a team structure in place, having a plan for how you deal with behaviors, requests for assistance, having some practices, doing some screening, and then doing that monitoring. And I love this, Alicia saying it's overwhelming when we're one person trying to help 600 plus students and staff too. You can't do it by yourself. Okay, so we really are going to emphasize this whole idea that with tier 1, you're not it. You got to have a team in place. So let's think about that, because you can't do it all. Okay. And often what is happening within our tiered systems of support is that we're all kind of trying to do as much as we can all by ourselves. Like we're in our silo, and sometimes it can feel like, okay, school counselor, this is you. In terms of MTSS working, because tier 1, it's for us too. Okay. We have to build collaboration. And this is the quote our colleague Peg always says, the better we are together, the better we are for students. So as we think about collaboration, what we know is in a lot of our schools, sometimes we're lucky to have some teams, right? Where we have maybe a school-based mental health person, maybe they're not on site every day. We might have a school social worker, we might have a school psychologist, there might be multiple school counselors. And there's some overlap in what we do. And so we have to work together to begin to delineate who is going to do what, how, and why. So really thinking about building our teams. So even if you leave today with nothing else, think about who can I put on my leadership team, okay? Does your school value tier 1? If so, that would mean there would be a team in place. So this is from a high school this one's from California, where you can see an administrators on the team, teachers, counselors. You get a team together so that you're not the only one building this tier 1. This is from obviously an elementary school where you've got an assistant principal, you've got a school psychologist, you have an interventionist, and then you have grade level representation and specialist representation. You gotta have a team. You have to have a team that meets once a month. This is another example. They would meet once a month after school. It was a requirement. There were people who were on this team, grade level teachers, special teachers, some educational assistants, usually led by a counselor, social worker, psychologist, or principal. And then they would receive some support through a district. So I recently got back from a training that I did in Maine. They had MTSS teams from each level that had school counselors, interventionists, special ed, regular education teachers. And they needed that team in order to build the system. You can't do it alone. Okay, so know that. Tier 1 usually meets monthly. Jake will talk a little bit more about tier 2. Again, these are systems that you put in place. And so something that we like to have schools do is to just begin to consider what internal resources you have, what external resources you have, so that you can think about, how do I create this team? Okay. I'll absolutely give you the link to the video after, when Jake takes over the reins, when you're all in your breakout rooms, I'll get you guys the link. So in the chat, how many of you have a team? Who's on the team? If you don't have a team, who are you going to talk to afterwards? What do y'all have? You know what? Actually, Jake, you know what? We'll have you talk about this when you get to your groups, because I want to make sure you have group time before too long. So let me go over just a few more highlights of tier 1 before we break you into breakout rooms. Another thing that you need to have, oh, I love this, amazing. Some of you having some amazing teams. Something you need to have are what are shared vision and expectations for students. Whether this is through school rules, right? Respectful, organized, achieving, responsible. What I love about this is that this incorporates that trauma-informed piece. So it's not just like, these are the rules, this is how we're going to be. It's also, we're going to acknowledge when I feel upset that under the surface, we have strategies in place in our school and in our classrooms. So tier 1, we have these systems in place. How did we do this? When I was an elementary school counselor, here it is, y'all. First ever school picture. Yep. An unfortunate perm happened in the year 2000. Don't recommend. We had, I knew my role as a school counselor, personal, social, career, academic. I had these great lessons in place. And yet I still felt like we were really reactive. Students were getting in trouble all the time. I was one of the first calls that would be received. And then our principal, our administrator started to say, you know what, we've got a problem here. This is our goal. We're gonna decrease discipline referrals by 50%. Okay. Guess who's in charge of this committee? It was me. Yeah. Yep. You're going to help decrease all of these discipline referrals, all reactive. So what did we do? We had other teams who were focused on math and reading. We had separate systems. And so we learned about PBIS. It wasn't just me. We created a PBIS team. We created our expectations for our school. We had them in multiple languages due to the population. We created ways to acknowledge students so that it wasn't just, we're going to decrease discipline. We're going to increase the culture of learning in our school related to tier 1. I aligned all of the things that I taught with our school-wide expectations so that there was continuity and so that teachers were hearing the same message. They started teaching. We created an aligned tier 1 and moved from just a reactive behavioral approach to creating a culture of learning. And we started to create tiers and systems to focus on academics and behaviorals, how to support students in the upper tiers. So we get to create these systems and we get to use data in intentional ways. These were some of the things that we had in place. We had practices in place. We had some of these systems in place where we would do weekly data reviews, monthly data reviews with the team. And this was all of the data that we would begin to use, even just referral of students who internalize, beginning to collaborate with the nurse, starting to pilot some some universal screening, using climate surveys in intentional ways. So this is what we did in order to build that system. How do other schools do it? Well, we're working with Belton, Missouri, a high school where one of the school counselors does 5-minute mental health minutes in advisory. And she goes in and she was talking about trauma and how that can impact your window of tolerance. And then the different advisory classes created lists of how they can stay within their window of tolerance. And they hung these all throughout the school. So even at the high school level, there are ways in which we can facilitate a culture in tier 1 where it's not all us, but we can help our system become better. Some other school counselors at a high school level had a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. What types of support do you need when you're coming into our counseling office? And then they could start to track that data. I just saw one of my students who's at this high school the other day, and she said they've had over 115 students come in and needing support so far in January. Okay. This is a sample triangle from the Oklahoma Department of Education where they have all of their practices laid out across tiers. So we're building these systems. You don't expect the triangle to be filled out completely all at one time. So it's our first breakout group. Here we go. We have a number of different action plan forms, and we gave those to the facilitators. And so we want you to spend the next 10 minutes to really thinking and discuss the systems you have in place, the data that you're using, and your practices. Oh, you want to, and I also have copies of this PowerPoint in the participant files. So you'll have all of this to go back to. What are your areas of strength? What areas are aligned with your school counseling program? Take 10 minutes, create some action steps, process what's working, and maybe one of those small steps that you can take. I'll put the last slide on just so that people, oh, where are the participant files? We can put those in the chat too. Okay, so I think I should stop sharing.
Okay. All right, so we're ready for breakout rooms, Jennifer?
We're ready for breakout rooms. And those of you in person, you get to talk. So we'll come back in 10 minutes at around 9:55.
Okay. So I'm going to open all the breakout rooms. You will need to jump in yourself to the one that matches your last name's first letter. So we have 3 for elementary, 3 for middle school, and 3 for high school. And for example, elementary room 1, anybody with the last name starting with A through I, that will be your room. And then J through R, and then S through Z. So hop into the breakout rooms and let me open them up. Let's hope they all work. If they don't, we're going to try something else. So, hey, welcome back to the main room, everyone. We still have a few more hopping back in. For the facilitators, as we go through the morning, if you all wouldn't mind to please use the activities at the top of your guide. The Jamboard activities we will do in the afternoon. So just to make sure you're not having to double dip into the same activity. So just a heads up. So, but we appreciate your all's help in facilitating your breakout rooms. And okay. All right, Jennifer.
Excellent. If anyone want to add anything to the chat? I know I popped into a couple of rooms and there was some good, what I love seeing and hearing is just some good cross collaboration and sharing of ideas at the high school level, sharing kind of these rewards that are really motivating students and helping students feel reconnected, people integrating trauma informed, like all of these things. This is why we want you all to have some time with each other, is so that you can get ideas and share ideas and talk about how right now it can be hard. Lisa's asking a question, typing in the Google form provided during breakout rooms. Will this be safe for my use? Make a copy of it to make sure that it's saved for your use. So I would save that on your personal drive so that you have it. So any of these materials, all of these participant materials, we want you to have them. That's why we gave them to you. Make copies of them, save them for you, okay? I'll go ahead and make sure to put the link for the Google Drive back in here so that you have all of this, okay? And love this. This is great. I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Jake, so that we can keep going, moving up the tiers. Hopefully you've got a small step idea that you can take with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. And yeah, it was great to be in the rooms. Thank you guys for kind of jumping in and just, staying on topic with discussing. And we're going to continue to kind of loop back a little bit to tier 1 and connect that to tier 2. And so we'll do that as we go. So I'm going to share my screen here and get set up, and we will get to some fun tier 2 stuff here. All right. And if I could just get a thumbs up that you can see tier 2 overview. Is that looking good? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Be able to see everything here. All right. So we're going to start with a tier 2 overview. And again, this is to ground all of us. So even if some of us are doing tier 2, with Fidelity and up and running, this will be a, nice refresher. And for folks that are, I think the average across those kind of rating scales of where we're at with tier 1 is maybe like a 3.5 or so, maybe a 3. And so, there's always room to improve, but you might have some good things in place and might be dabbling in tier 2 or thinking about it. So either way, my goal is that you have a solid foundation of, what is tier 2, whether we're doing it or to have us think ahead for when we are ready for that. And so we're going to do that for a couple minutes. As I do these kind of foundational tier 2 overview slides, please take a look at the
Is it always
the link that Jen shared, and pull up this document. Should be has the number 1 in front of it, so it should be near the top of the resources, just under the folders there. The MTSS Tier 2 action planning template. So again, if you could have, if you're by yourself, pull it up. If you're with the team, have somebody pull this up in the next 2 to 3 minutes. This is going to be a good organized note-taking resource. And basically this is outlining really core aspects of Tier 2 across the systems that we want to have in place, the data we want to collect and use, and then the practices that we want to provide. And so we're not going to go, we're going to kind of go deeper into some of these than others, but I want you to kind of have this nice summary of kind of the Tier 2 things we want to have in place. And then we're going to have some stopping points where you can take notes and reflect on this stuff a little bit. So again, in the next 2 to 3 minutes, as I kind of go through a couple of things, please find your way to this. It's called the MTSS Tier 2 action planning template. It's in that link that Jen's been putting in the chat there. And again, this will be a nice organizing kind of takeaway for you to continue to use this stuff. All right, so Jen did a nice job of kind of reminding us and going over Tier 1. And I want to position Tier 2, kind of within the MTSS framework here. So we know Tier 1, again, it's for all students. It's stuff that we're just doing as part of the academic curriculum, as part of, building that school culture. And I use this graphic really intentionally because for Tier 2, we want to make sure that if kids need more support, they have elevated needs and they need more support beyond what's going on Tier 1, we want to layer that on top of Tier 1, right? So if you guys are doing classroom lessons, if they're getting SEL curriculum, if they're doing school-wide events, that all stays, and we got to build on it and do a little bit more intentional work with Tier 2. We want to use data to determine what kids need Tier 2 support, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but we want to use a couple of different types of data, right? We don't want to use 50 different data points to overwhelm us, but we want to move beyond just those office discipline referrals and see if we can have other aspects of attendance and student and family perspective and staff perspective on who needs support. We also want to make sure that, these are going to be, because kids have elevated needs, these are smaller, more focused interventions. So typically that means small groups for school counselors, for check-in, check-out, that's, smaller groups of students, because they need a little bit more of that, not quite intensive individual interventions, but kind of more of that small group, a little more targeted to narrow down to what they need. And then that last piece, those last pieces there is, we want to just make sure that we're giving them a little more acknowledgement, a little more support. We want to monitor how they're doing on those Tier 2 interventions. And the more we can involve family, community, and the students, frankly, then the more buy-in they're going to have at this level. So again, we'll dig deep into this, but this is more just a visual to kind of let us know that, even as we talk about, we'll touch on Tier 3 at the end of our time today. But the idea with that is students that need individual Tier 3 support are still participating everything school-wide Tier 1. They're still getting that Tier 2 level support that we typically are involved in. And they might also be getting some individualized intensive support. Okay, so the big takeaway hopefully is we're not removing support just because a kid is accessing more intensive needs. We got to keep that foundational stuff there. The idea is that they might be moving in and out of these tiers, right? So we don't want to have them in Tier 2 intervention, remove them from participating in some other aspect of Tier 1, and then when they don't need Tier 2 support, they don't have anything else to kind of fall back on. So we want to keep those in place. When we narrow in on Tier 2, again, I'll let you read those paragraphs later, but what I want to focus on is that Tier 2, there's some really core features that we want to make sure that if you're doing it, that we are kind of meeting these core features. If you're planning for Tier 2, maybe in the near future, these are really important features to fall back on. This really comes from both practice, so what's working in schools, and thankfully there's lots of research around this stuff too, to say, hey, what works best at this Tier 2 level, and this is the stuff here. So one thing that we need to improve on, I think, as school counselors, is having some of these tier 2 interventions continuously available. Traditional small group counseling, there's kind of a 6 to 8 week period, and you have one group of kids and they kind of build rapport, and there's a scope and sequence, and there's value in that, right? There's a group that needs to be that way, but we also want to find those groups that can have more students come in and out of them as needed, so they're not waiting weeks and weeks to be able to access that. I'll talk about some examples. The other stuff too, and I'm going to touch on some of these just briefly more than others, but we want to also make sure that as staff need support. And I heard Kim in the high school group talked about, getting just kind of emails daily from teachers saying, hey, I need support with this kid. When we have a referral system, right, whether it's emails or requests for assistance forms, whatever our system is, we want to make sure that we're responding to those staff and getting support for those teachers within a couple days, right? So we know, especially if you've been a teacher, that if you have to go one day with a student that's struggling, it's a lot, right? And so if we're talking about weeks and weeks before we can get those kids support, get them plugged into a tier 2 intervention, that's way too long, right? So as we're building these systems, we've got to have things that we can respond to pretty quickly. We do want to have low effort by teachers, and what that means is teachers are already overwhelmed, just like we are with the folks with caseload of 600. Same thing for the teachers. So if we're going to ask them to do any kind of reinforcement or helping out or teaching kind of expectations around our interventions, we got to make sure that it's a very light lift, right? And so a lot of the check-in, check-out type of reinforcement they're giving, we're talking 30 to 60 seconds a period, right? If you're middle and high school. So we got to keep that in mind. And then I just want to jump down to, making sure that as we're, trying on some of the interventions I'm going to talk about, the more we can match those up to kids' needs, the better. And the more we can kind of involve them in helping them define their goals and getting some of that buy-in, the better they're going to respond, right? So again, these are kind of the critical features of tier 2, these bullet points that we want to kind of just have up as a checklist. So in my mind, if I'm already doing some tier 2 groups, I'm kind of using this as a checklist. What am I kind of doing already? What are some areas I can fine tune a little bit? If I'm planning for tier 2, maybe next year we want to start doing some of this stuff, making sure that we have this stuff in place before we get going. Okay, so the other thing I want to introduce before we get into some more specifics is the system data practices, and Jen highlighted this really well, but this really comes from PBIS, Positive Behavior Supports, but really is a foundation of MTSS in terms of the 3 kind of buckets that we want to make sure we have in place for this stuff to work really well, right? So I'm going to highlight a couple different things from each of these 3 circles, or I call them buckets. But before we do that, I want to just kind of add that, all the system stuff is for the adults, right? So we have to get our systems in place. We got to get our stuff organized so that we can better support kids, right? And so, to do that with some equity in mind, we want to make sure that we're having that knowledge of our students' culture, our knowledge and our self-awareness of our own culture and how that plays into the supports that we offer and how we support kids. We also want to, when we're looking at data, making sure that's culturally valid for us and for our kids, and we want to be looking at our data to see what kids are, how kids are performing and what kids are maybe accessing supports and which aren't. And when it comes to practices, and I'll hit on this more, but making sure that the interventions that kids are getting really is aligned with what they're bringing in terms of culture. So that means, family values, that means race, ethnicity, might mean gender, might mean other things like language. So we want to just make sure that as much as possible, this stuff is lining up with kids and families, again, so it's more effective. And in the end, to increase that equity. Okay, so again, just some things to think about along these systems data practices. The last couple of things I want to hit on before we dig a little bit deeper is, if anybody is kind of in the place of feeling like, we're doing some tier 1, maybe you rated, we're doing like a 3 or a 4 out of scale of 1 to 5. There's kids that need more support, and I'm kind of, often asked to do those things. If you're feeling overwhelmed at all, or kind of thinking like this is a lot to kind of like add on, to me, this is a really good place to ground ourselves, because what we want to do in terms of those systems, what the adults do is think about what do we already have in place, right? So if I were to say, list all the things you're doing that meet the needs of kids with elevated needs. So small group stuff, individual check-ins, grade checks, advising, you guys would probably fill up the chat, right? And I know we're doing lots of stuff to support kids. And so we want to build on that stuff rather than create all this new stuff, right? So we're already doing stuff within tier 2. Hopefully today I just give you some more ways to organize that and maybe some new ideas to add on it. With data, again, what's available, right? So we're going to talk about different types of data, but if I were to ask you to list what types of data you have available that can inform you of what kids might need more support, you're probably going to list office discipline referrals, attendance, grades, probably some school-wide family or kid surveys, maybe some staff surveys. Maybe you have some groups that get feedback from kids or families. So all those things play into the data that we can use to say what kids need a little bit more support with tier 2. And then the practices, again, we want to just make sure that as much as possible, we're using interventions that are evidence-based, culturally sustaining, so lined up with students' culture. We can bring that into the intervention, and trauma-informed, right? And so I'm going to give you lots of resources for those things. But I don't know about you all, probably not in Kentucky, but back when I was a school counselor, when I started in Washington State, my first 6 years, I was doing a lot of what the counselor did before me. A lot of lunch bunch groups where we kind of had brought some lunch in and played some games and had some fun and built some rapport. Was doing a lot of, kind of those types of groups, doing a lot of looking at Google and Pinterest to find ideas of fun activities. And luckily we don't need to do that stuff anymore. And if you're doing that, I'm not knocking you individually in terms of trying to get stuff for kids, right, and resources. But what I'm saying is, we don't have to do that anymore. We have evidence-based practices that are free, accessible, or reasonable price in terms of the value. And so I'm going to give you all that you need to know for those things. So we don't need to do that anymore, because what we find is with that stuff is that there's a lack of structure. It's not lined up with goals or any kind of standards. It also doesn't have a way to track kind of data to see if it's effective or not. And there hasn't been any evidence. Maybe you have some evidence that you can add to it, but usually there's not a lot of evidence if it works for kids like ours. So that's why we want to make sure that we're using stuff that's kind of has that structure, that scope and sequence, and also that's worked for kids like ours. So we'll add to that. All right, so we are going to jump into some fun, and this is fun for me, so hopefully it's a little bit fun for you too. So in terms of the systems data practices, we're going to start with the systems, right? And we start there because if the adults and the staff in the buildings don't have their stuff together, if we don't have consistency in place, systems in place, we're not going to be able to reach the needs of kids, right? And as we jump into this, I always give the example of, my first 6 years, and that's really where I learned MTSS. We scaled up in our school, tiers 1, 2, and 3, and then I helped out with the district team that did the same. But my first, I would say 2 years, our system was, if you have a problem with the kid, you email or you come down to Jake's office and you say, hey, Jake, so-and-so is doing such and such, I need help. And usually that wasn't a very calm, patient tone. And I get it. Like I've been a sub teacher, so in the classroom, it's hard to teach even if kids are engaged, right? So, but that said, my anxiety would go through the roof, and I want to help everybody, and I'm there to support staff, but I'm putting out individual fires and super stressed all day, right? And so a lot of this system stuff, when we get organized, and we want to do things preventatively, a lot of this stuff honestly came from those first 6 years of just figuring out, okay, what can we do? So this isn't a fire drill every single day. And so we're going to talk about some team structures we can put in place. a systematic approach to delivering some of these tier 2 supports. And then we're going to look at data we can use to figure out, okay, what kids might need tier 2 support and how do we monitor how they're doing. And then I'm going to provide you lots of examples of interventions, right? So before we jump in, I think, I hope you can use this next kind of section in 2 ways. So if you're already doing tier 2, just kind of say, okay, what are we doing well? Is there areas we need to kind of tighten up a little bit? Is there any resources that I'm going to provide for you that you can use for that? Okay. But if what you're doing is working and you have data to support that, just keep doing that, right? Don't change anything. If you haven't developed any tier 2 systems yet, I'm going to give you lots of resources. And honestly, for the time we have, it's going to be a lot of, here's how to use this template. And then as you're back with your school teams and developing this the rest of the year, you can use those to kind of start documenting your systems, right? And so those are kind of the 2 ways that we can use this stuff. All right, so we're starting off with the team, and we're doing that because we want to build the systems to support the staff behavior. This isn't the school counselor is not the team, right? So it's like what Jen said, where we got to have, it's fewer people for tier 2, but we got to have people that we can meet with, we can look at data, and we can organize around to provide these supports. Okay, so in terms of MTSS, once you're scaled up tiers 1, 2, and 3, you're going to have that tier 1 team Jen talked about. For tier 2, really what tier 2 is focused on is overseeing all those tier 2 interventions that are going on, right? So, and we'll talk a little bit about tier 3, but a lot of schools now are combining kind of tier 2 and tier 3 teams. But the big thing is making sure that we have a small group of people that can look at that, the kids getting tier 2 interventions. We can track their data to see how they're doing. If they're doing well, I'm going to give you some data points to say, okay, they can fade off or graduate. If they're not doing well, then we've got to be able to notice that so we can kind of get in there and talk about what's going on. How can we kind of alter that intervention a little bit? Okay, so we're really sitting in this tier 2, kind of the intervention management aspect of this. Okay, so the next several resources are for your team, right? So if you don't really have a team, if you kind of do your own interventions, or maybe you kind of talk with the school psych or somebody else, these are just things to organize you a little bit, right? If you haven't done tier 2 yet, I highly recommend that you consider using some of these to really think through intentionally about what the tier 2 team looks like, but also to document things, right? I think one thing we do is I train lots of schools out here in California and elsewhere on tier 2. We do a good job of doing the work. We don't do as good a job as documenting it. And documenting is creating a system so that we can communicate out what we do. And also as people come and go, we can start to kind of leave that structure in place, right? And so, yeah, Sally, and I hear you on that of being a team of one, and some of what we're going to be talking about, and Jen reiterated, is identifying folks that we need to be meeting with to be talking about this stuff, because we can do a lot on our own. We can provide interventions, but if it's going to be a systematic process, we really do need folks around us to collaborate with. So this document is in your folder. I'm going to share a couple examples of it, but I actually recommend this as a first step, whether you're doing any kind of tier 2 or not. I did this at my first school, and what it did is it cut out a lot of, we called it cutting out the junk. But all that meant was when I got there, we had lots of teams doing lots of different things, but not all the teams really had a clear purpose, and we just kind of met and talked about kids and then left. There wasn't a lot of data used, there wasn't a lot of structure on it. So what this is, and this is in the Making MTSS workbook, but the templates in there, is it's a way to kind of list an inventory. Here's the teams we have in place, and you can list tiers 1, 2, and 3. We're focusing on tier 2 now, but the idea is to list the teams you have in place that meet for kids. What are the goals and purpose? What data do those teams use? What tiers do they support? So do they support tiers 1, 2, or 3? What targeted groups are they for? So are they for all kids, kids with disabilities? Who's involved? Okay, so what staff is there? And then for the school counselors, do these teams relate to, is it an academic, career, or social emotional? And then based on those things, so once you kind of listed out those and discussed those teams, that last column really is to say, hey, do we have any teams that we can collapse? Do we have any teams that like we meet and they're fun, but really if we have that half hour, an hour, man, we'd rather really spend those on talking about kids and data and how they're doing. And so it's an opportunity to really be intentional with the limited time we have, and probably the tons and tons of meetings that we have, right, and teams we have. So the main thing with this too is, and I'll show you this here. These are prompts that if you're in this space, you can kind of take and use with your staff specifically. And I walk through this with teams that we work with, is we say, out of all those teams you have, we got to have a team that part of their role is looking at kids getting tier 2 level support, right? So you can do that resource activity map at step 1. And then basically it's saying, sometimes you have to collapse teams, or you have to say, okay, this team that we were using to kind of sit and we kind of bring a kid of concern and we talk about for a half hour, that's one kid at a time for half an hour. Let's use that time for tier 2, where we can look at kids getting tier 2 support, and let's look at how they're doing and see if we can problem solve and monitor their progress. Okay, so this really outlines what teams should look like at tiers 1, 2, and 3. And we want to make sure that if we're going to do good tier 2 interventions, we want to have those bullet points under tier 2 there in place. Okay, so this is a good one to kind of, you can do these steps as a school team if you haven't already developed any of that. Okay, so after we've kind of done that inventory and we've kind of looked at, what teams do we have in place? And again, I recommend wherever you're at, starting there just to kind of make sure you're intentional with your meeting time. When it comes to tier 2, here's why it's often recommended that we have some kind of standalone tier 2 team. Okay, folks ask every time I do any kind of tier 2 team training, can we just combine it with tier 1? If it can work, that's fine in some circumstances, but typically what we see, right? So Jen described meeting once a month, looking at school-wide data to see how are we doing with our expectations, with ODRs. If you do that once a month and you spend your time on doing school-wide stuff, I don't see how you have time, unless you're meeting for 3 or 4 hours, to dig into kids getting tier 2 support, right? And so we say a standalone team, because this stuff needs to happen, typically makes sense, right? So we want to monitor and have up on a screen or have somewhere where we can visualize, what kids are getting tier 2 supports in those small groups. And how are they doing in terms of their progress, right? So that means looking at data. We also need to look at incoming referrals and see what kids might need to get into tier 2 level supports. And then oftentimes, once we get some fluency around this stuff, and again, I'm calling out Kim a lot just because I sat in that high school group a lot and heard some really good things. If there's teachers or staff that are needing support with kids and they're always emailing you, reaching out, it's a lot more bang for your buck to go in, carve out a 10 minutes of staff meeting and say, here's one classroom level SEL type support intervention activity you can do to start to build some of the skills with the staff, the teachers in the classroom, to prevent some of these tier 2 type needs. So you might be given some PD around that. Or if you're doing a tier 2 level intervention, you might be able to give some PD or some quick tips on how to implement that or reinforce that to staff, right? Over on the right-hand side, you want to focus that tier 2 time on looking at data, right? So who's doing okay in their groups, in their check and check out, who might need some more support. Okay, so that's really why these two things, there's a systems part of it, but there's also the data problem solving that If you can do this with a combined other team and not meet for multiple hours, I think that can work. But typically what I've seen is needing a smaller team that really focuses just on this stuff here. All right, so the next couple of things I want to talk about are really that fleshing out that team and give you some resources to be able to either document your current team, or if you're in that place, you know, a couple of folks back said, I'm a team of one. This really can help you kind of get the wheels turning in terms of who are some folks that I can maybe meet with every couple of weeks to talk about kids getting Tier 2 support. Okay, so this is all in the folder. I'm going to give you some templates, just Word doc templates that you can fill out for your setting. But this one is focused on the composition. So who should be on this Tier 2 team that meets? You want to have a coordinator, someone that kind of is the glue to the team, that is making sure that you're meeting, making sure that you're focusing on student data. You're not kind of doing what my favorite principal of all time, and if she was here, she'd be laughing with us, but she was really good at getting us off task in meetings because she loved to talk about kids, and so did we, but she'd find all kinds of fun stories to go off on. And I'd be saying, Bobby, let's look at how they're doing. They've been keeping track of their goals each week. Let's kind of check it out. So somebody that can kind of guide the ship a little bit, right? And these are just people that typically in schools fulfill this role. But again, it's who do you have and who can you bring to the table, right? So this is not a prescription. This is a typical thing, and you got to make it work for your setting. You want to have people obviously that have behavioral expertise if we're focused on behavior. So whoever that is in your building, if you're the only person, so if you're a school counselor and you don't have school psychs, social workers, mental health folks, it's looking at your staff, and certainly everyone has special ed staff, right? And those folks tend to have a lot of expertise around behavior, around intervention. So sometimes those can be our best allies. You want to have admin authority, and that's primarily for that system stuff where if we need to kind of roll some stuff out to whole staff, or if we want to make sure that staff are doing certain aspects of interventions, or we need resources for things, those admins eventually are going to need to be involved anyway to kind of get that stuff going. So we got to make sure that we're able to include them in that. And then knowledge of students. And this is where you kind of look at your staff and say, who are those people that kind of know kids and families in our community? Who are folks that have been there a while? Who are folks that maybe are in positions that see lots of different kids, lots of different grades, that they could be a good resource to talk about interventions and what kids need. And then that last piece again is, a lot of times it's that support staff, but they have that school-wide scope versus maybe just a classroom scope. And so these are kind of the roles that you want to have. And you can kind of make sense about why in terms of providing Tier 2 supports for kids, but then also some potential folks that can fulfill. And then on the far right there is, again, let's get a little creative. And if you're doing this already, this is kind of icing on the cake. If you can have a Tier 1 person that's on that Tier 1 team to kind of come to some of those Tier 2 meetings, there's a lot more collaboration and continuity between Tier 1 and 2. Having a teacher or social worker, if you have one, again, they can offer expertise in terms of here's what work in classroom, here's this might not be the best fit for a teacher to implement. And then anytime we can have community, family, student voice, and it might not be every meeting. If we're talking about kids' personal behavior and family situations, we don't want to have other kids or family there necessarily, but strategically having kids and family inform and be a part of what interventions are used and how things are going is just going to increase the buy-in and the cultural sustainability of those interventions. So in terms of just a couple more things about the team, I want to make sure you leave here with resources to kind of compare what you have. Also, if you're developing some of this stuff, if you're the team of one, this should give you everything you need to know to kind of start having conversations. So with the responsibilities, when you're in that team, again, especially if you're already meeting, this is really a good gut check to kind of say, are we really doing this systematically? Do we have a facilitator that's kind of organizing things, sending out the meeting minutes, looking at the agenda? Do we have somebody that consistently takes the minutes and writes the notes, sends that out to folks? Do we have a data person that they can bring in the student data and post that somewhere and kind of make sure that we're using data each meeting and we're not just kind of sitting around and kind of, using our opinion or just kind of talking about kids without any kind of measurable data with that. And then the action recorder really is in charge of, as we have those action items that we want to use, that person really is making sure that we're documenting those and what it is, who's going to, kind of be in charge of that and the timeline. I think that's the biggest difference with tier 2 and any other team is that, I've been in lots of meetings where you go in there and you talk about stuff and then you leave and then you come back next week and you're like, all right, what did we talk about again? And really nothing's happened, right? And so action item is like, what's the kid need or what's the staff need? Who's going to do it by next week? And then when you come back, then you can kind of see, okay, what do we do? What do we need to do more of or adjust? And then active team members are, again, those other folks that are just giving that feedback. They're actively engaged. Maybe they're completing a task, but they're a part of that team as well. Okay, so those are responsibilities in terms of who we want to have. And yes, Sally, we're going to get to that every couple of weeks, but we're gonna hit on that in just a second. And so this is the template that I mentioned. So again, this should look familiar with what we just talked about. But even if you have a team, I really recommend that you use this to document and to kind of make sure that you have this system in place. And then that way, as team members come and go, this is a living document, in your MTSS or your school counseling handbook or folder that you have, that this can be a document. Okay, and so you can write in for all these roles that we want to have, who will fulfill this role or who is fulfilling this role. And so again, this is a template to get you organized for that team piece. All right, so Sally, this is for you. So Jen mentioned tier 1 is once a month, and again, think about the intentionality behind that. So once a month, we're talking about looking at school-wide data. So look at office discipline referrals, any kind of staff or student surveys. How are we doing with teaching expectations? So about once a month, you can check in and go over that stuff. A bigger team, kind of how are we doing school-wide? But if we're talking about kids getting small group, more targeted interventions, if we wait a month to see how they're doing, if they're not doing well, that's going to be a really rough month for the teacher and probably for you, right? So we got to meet a little more frequently to make sure that kids are on track. See if there's any new kids that need support. Some teams, tier 2 teams, meet weekly, and that's fine if you can do that in terms of your time and energy and all that. But typically the sweet spot is every 2 weeks. If we go beyond that, again, lots of times, even if you're doing it well, there's going to be a couple kids that need added support. And if they're going more than 2 weeks without that, then it's not good for the kid, number one. But again, the staff's going to be really, really feeling that. So we got to make adjustments before that comes. All right, so I got excited there. So I want to take a breath for a second and return us back to that action planning sheet. And this is a place to kind of take a second, think back to the team responsibilities, the team structure that we talked about, the rationale for even having a team, and just document any notes that came up for you on this document. So we really focus more on the tier 2 team aspect of it. And again, this is all stuff that across tier 2, we want to have this stuff in place, but we focus kind of on the team part. So for you, what's already in place, meaning you can just, this is for you. So you can do phrases, shorthand, whatever, but just type in or scribbling in a couple of things of what's already in place. If you're a team of one, that person that mentioned that, just write in team of one, right? And that's a starting place. But then what else do you need? Then wherever you're at, put something there, right? So what else out of what we talked about maybe is needed? Maybe there's a role on there that you're like, you know what? we don't really have that. Seems to be a big piece of it. I want to have some conversations about who in our building or in our community might be able to contribute that role. And maybe it's just filling out the template. So you might, what else is needed? You might put use template, right? And then any next steps that you want to capture, because you guys are going to have lots of good stuff today. We don't want to lose some of this stuff. So what are some next steps around that team part of it that you want to capture? Okay, so go ahead and take, I'll leave this up for just about 30 seconds or so. Take a couple minutes to, as we go on to this next piece, to capture any of those golden nuggets in that note taking there. All right. Okay, so if you're in the middle of that note taking, just ignore me for the next minute while you're doing that, because I really want you to capture that. Okay. All right. So I want to talk about taking a systematic approach to tier 2, and this piece is critical. I want to keep the content pretty low in terms of I just want to show you a couple visuals, and then I want to give you lots of time in a couple minutes here to really just kind of digest and think about where you're at with your teams, where you're at with this systematic approach. Okay, so finish that note taking, and then we can get back to this this piece here. Okay, and for folks following along on this on the buckets of system data practices, we're still at the systems piece, right? And so we're really, wanting to build systems first, because if we don't have this organized, I can promise you with high probability that things are going to fall apart at some point, right? So I know, because I did this, we had lots of kids that needed more support. I want to get them in a group ASAP. I want to get them on check-in, check-out with a goal sheet right away. But if you don't put the systems in place, it's going to be putting out fires, and you're not going to have a team. You're not going to have a place to look at data. So we got to build that first. And I would say if that takes a half a year or a whole year, it'll be worth it in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, because you're not going to have staff saying, oh, that doesn't work. We tried that tier 2 thing, that doesn't work. It probably is because we didn't have the systems in place, right? So we want to build these systems. All right, so I just want to get some feedback in terms of what I want to hit on, but also is for us to reflect on. How do you currently support students who have elevated, and in this case, tier 2 needs? Okay, so we're doing our stuff school-wide, all the stuff Jen talked about. Kids are popping up, teachers are emailing you, kids are getting ODRs. What do you do? How do you support those kids? It doesn't matter where you're at with it. This is not a test. It's just kind of what do you do, formally or informally? And just drop that in the chat so I can get a sense of what kinds of things are going on, and that'll help me. Okay, Sally, thank you. Check in, check out, small groups. Okay, good. So evidence-based practice with check in, check out. You got small groups going. What else? Collect baseline data, meet this behavior team. Awesome. So Sally and Bethany are starting us off with like the gold standard, what we want to do. And I know folks are doing that, and you're probably doing stuff, even if you're not doing things systematically. I know you're doing something, because if you're a counselor in a building and kids are needing support, you're going to be getting emails, right? So lots of check-in, 2x10 mentors, good. Individual meetings, meet one-on-one. Yeah, thanks, Tammy. Behavior plans, okay, individual check-in, student shadowing. Awesome. Okay, lots of check-in, check-out. That's good that that's floating around in Kentucky. Okay, so keep entering those in. Again, even if it's formal, informal, I'm going to kind of use that as a reference point to reiterate or to add to. But those are the types of things that we typically see and that we actually want to see, right? So some things are a little more individual check-ins. Hey, what's going on? How can I help you? Using that one-on-one relationship. But we also want to use those systematic kind of evidence-based interventions that you guys are talking about. Okay, so keep those coming in, and again, I'll reiterate those. Okay, thank you. All right, so in terms of a tier 2 process, I want to show you 2 kind of versions of this, and the main thing is whether it's a list like this or more of a flow chart which is, I'm going to show you some examples. The main thing is I really encourage us to document our process. Okay. So whether you have let's say you have a tier 2 team, you've been doing it for years, you got 3 really good interventions you use, you meet every 2 weeks and you're doing it. You've done the tiered fidelity inventory as a tier 2 team. That's all awesome, right? So just make sure you have that documented. If you don't, then use something in the next couple of minutes that I show you to document that. Again, if you're starting out, if you're that team of 1, I really encourage you to use one of these templates or visuals I'm going to give you to just document what you currently do. Even if that is, and again, Kim, I don't mean to keep calling you out, but I heard so much, it rang true for me for sure, is even if the system is, I get emails from teachers and I kind of just try to help them or the kid as much as I can. Just write that out. So here's our current process, right? Because I'm going to give you some tools and strategies that as you fine tune that process, we want to document that out, because what documenting does is it makes us think or have a conversation about, okay, what do we do? Let's sit down as a staff or team. How do we handle this stuff? Are we happy with how we handle kids with elevated needs? Or is it like putting out fires every day? Okay, so it makes you have a conversation, and then it makes you put some things in place to make that process better. Okay, so I literally with my leadership staff team said, I don't think this is the best way to support kids. Emailing Jake or coming down to his office and me trying to figure out each kid, I don't think it's helping as many kids as needed. So let's be a little more systematic. So this list is actually kind of like where you want to end up being. Yeah, Vicky, I'm with you. So this list is where we want to go. So I'm not saying if you're a team of 1, I'm not saying do this tomorrow. I'm saying this is what you want to get to. Okay, so give ourselves grace and a time to put this stuff in place. But we want to have a formal request for assistance form, right? So emails are fine, but we want to have a place and a space, preferably digital, where staff or students and families, if they need to, and I'll show you examples, if they need to, they can ask for that support, right? And then the tier 2 team, which isn't going to be just the counselor, but it's going to be a couple people that meet every couple of weeks to monitor kids. That team can get that information and say, okay, are there any kids that need more support? Okay. And then we want to be able to respond and follow up within 48 hours, right? So 48 to 72. And again, that means we don't want to leave any staff member hanging. Okay. So that also means we got to have stuff to follow up with, right? So you might be panicking saying, geez, 2 days, how do I think of stuff in 2 days? If we have systems in place already, it's going to feel so good to say, oh, let's look at our menu of stuff. What's the need? Boom, let's match it up. Okay. You'll have a place, and sometimes every couple of weeks when you meet, some of that time might be to have a teacher come to the meeting and talk a little bit more about what's going on. A lot of times that can happen not at meeting time though. So meeting time's focused on looking at kids and data. And then the end goal, step 5 or 6 there, is to really say what's the need and then match that need with an intervention that I'm going to talk about. Okay, and then you want to progress monitor every couple of weeks through the team. You make adjustments if a kid's doing well. If they're not, I'm going to give you some data cut points for that, including exit criteria. That's the goal. They're not staying in tier 2 forever. And like my favorite principal who liked to get us off track said, Jake, do not take that kid out of your group. I was like, Bobby, what are you talking about? And she didn't want the kid to go back to kind of the behaviors that were causing this headache before the group, right? I said, Bobby, the idea is that they've got some skills, they've gotten the support, they're ready to go and use those. If all the kids stay in tier 2 all year, we're not going to be able to meet the needs of the other 20, 30 kids that might need it, right? So we got to have exit criteria and we got to monitor. And if they don't exit, that means either the intervention is not effective or they need more tier 3 individualized support. Okay. So again, this is the process, the steps that we want to get to. List yours out. If a list doesn't work for you, I'm going to show you some examples of this is kind of how my brain works, right? Maybe yours does. However your brain works, just document it, right? But this is literally, this is a 2022 version of what I did with our team. So I sat in a room, and I can picture the conference room now. I said, this isn't working. Like, how do we want the process to go? I pulled up a Word document on the screen, and I started making boxes, and I started typing. And this is the refined version of what came out of it. So what we said was, all right, we got to have some data that we collect, right? So we want to be preventative starting. So if I'm in February, starting in the fall, what data do we want to collect to say, hey, at the end of summertime, we can look at this data and say, okay, these are some kids that are popping up. Let's preventively put them in groups, so we're not waiting for them to kind of do their thing, right? So we listed the data that we had, right? And this is a blank template. It's in your drive, so that you can add in your own data. There's also an annotated copy, which gives you lots of different ideas and examples that you can use, okay? So list your data. We listed ODRs, attendance. We had a school-wide screener at the time. So we listed our 3 or 4 data points, okay? The questions used for reflection, that came later, where once we got in the flow of this, we actually wanted to get more at the equity piece, right? And this was a district initiative and really a belief of our school staff of, we need to be, once we have our data, let's look at what kids are getting support, which aren't, and are there kids disproportionately getting things like office discipline referrals? Okay, so these are checkpoints. You can add your own or edit these, but these are things that once you get going and fine tune, we want to be able to examine our data to kind of look for those patterns, okay? So once we collect our data, we said as a team, okay, what's next, right? So we have requests for assistance, we got some teacher emails, we're looking at ODR data, and we're here at our tier 2 team, we say, okay, there's some kids that are popping up. This kid's got 3 office discipline referrals and it's October. This teacher filled out that really quick Google form that says, I need help with this kid. Let's figure out what intervention is best, okay? So ideally, you want to have this like little menu of interventions, so you don't have to spend 2 weeks going on Pinterest and figuring out stuff to do. You want to say, hey, we have this stuff in place. We know it works. It's available. What we did originally, and I'll show you something that will help with this, but what we did originally was saying, okay, what are all the interventions we currently have? Let's list them and take inventory. Let's cut out the junk. So I cut out a lot of the lunch bunches. And if you do a lunch bunch, that's fine, but there's got to be some criteria around that, right? So anytime that I had a half an hour and kids came in with their lunch and we kind of had fun, I was like, okay, that half hour is golden. And so why don't I teach a curriculum or have some skill building and practice and goal setting rather than eat and have fun? I can still build relationships, but I'm going to put structure around it, right? So we listed those things. And in the end, what you want to do is have quality, not quantity. So it's better to have 2 to 3 to 4 evidence-based interventions that you can measure and that work, rather than having 15 things that you're not really sure if they work, or maybe you just do because they've always been done. Okay. And so we got to a place where we had that intervention menu. I'll share some examples. And then down here are evidence-based cut points. So luckily for us, people have done research on this stuff, which is kind of cool. I won't bore you with the details of it, but basically what people did was said, let's measure if we provide intervention for students, or if we don't, based on the number of ODRs they have, based on the time of year, and let's see what happens. And so they really developed these cut points to say kids with between 2 to 5 ODRs are a good fit for tier 2. And then once they're on there, we want to do the intervention for at least 6 weeks, so the staff and the kids can build some fluency. We don't want to change anything up 2 weeks prior or after vacations. That can throw some kids off. I know with my son, who's 4, if we start doing things different out of the routine right before some kind of break or vacation, it throws them off, right? So same with our older kids. And then there's guidelines for fading and graduating students. Again, we don't want them to be on these interventions forever. Okay, and that last piece down here is, again, this is more about once we get this up and running, examining these tier 2 practices. Okay. So might be losing it, but we're good. So I'm going to show you a couple more examples and we're going to pause. We're going to unpack this and see where we're at in terms of what we're doing. Okay. So this is another example. Okay. And Jen, I'm going to give it a go for 2 minutes, and if not, I might have you help.
I can jump in whenever you need me. We're almost to breakout rooms.
Yep, perfect. So this is another example, and this is a high school example. They like to take a little more of a fluid flowchart approach, but it was very similar, where we said this is the kind of the decision-making process that we want to have, and some kind of yes, no, choose your own adventure kind of options. But in the end, if you kind of look at the big buckets of this stuff, it's going to be a data collection, it's going to be an implement intervention, and it's going to be monitoring the progress, right? And so it's a similar version of that. So if this works for you, this is a perfectly great format that you can have. Same thing here. Okay, and this is in the Making MTSS Work. I know it's a little blurry, but again, it's the same version, but it's adapted for their context. Okay, and so they have different procedures maybe in terms of what the Dean of Students does, in terms of universal screeners in place, but you want to just document, here's our process, here's how we get from data and kids having a need to intervention to progress monitoring. Okay, and you can see down here, the interventions you have in place is going to vary by what you have, right? And starting small is fine, but you want to fine tune and kind of add to those based on some stuff I'm going to share with you later. Okay, so lots of examples there. Take a second, we're going to do breakout here pretty quickly, but take just a second to kind of think about your tier 2 process and just write some quick notes on what's in place. Do you have a process? I guarantee you do, even if it means I get emails and I try to help the kid or help the student. Like, that's a process, right? It just means you need to fine tune it. So what's working, what's in place? Excuse me. And then what else do you need? Okay, do you need to document it? Okay. And then next steps. Do you need to document it? Do you need to have a conversation with staff, with leadership team to say, hey, what do we do? What do we want to do? What does that look like? So take just a minute, jot down those golden nuggets before we have some breakout time. Okay. Excuse my voice, but we're going to do 10 to 15 minutes of just to kind of sit in the tier 2 process and the teams kind of frame of mind that we just talked about. So the prompts that you're going to have some time to think about is, what does your tier 2 process currently look like? Okay, and again, it's wherever you're at. If you're a team of 1 and it's, again, the one-on-one reaction, that's fine. Like, that's where you're at, document it, use the resources to kind of add on to that. Okay, what are the strengths? What are the areas you need of improvement? And then the big thing is that process documented and communicated out to staff for sure, so they know what to do to get help, but also students and families. Okay, as we'll talk about in a little bit, we want to have families and students be involved in this as much as possible, right? So they know how to get support, and so they can inform the process so it works for them, right? Okay, so we are, I'm going to stop sharing here and we're ready for that breakout.
Okay. All right, I'm going to open up the rooms again. And again, if you did not join the last time, if you'll go to the bottom of your screen where it says more, and there's 3 dots, you can pick which room to go in based on your level and your last name.
And this is a great opportunity to stand up, take your eyeballs away from the computer, you know, kind of do what you need to do. Kind of we'll wrap a little bit of a break in here as well, just because we know this is a lot of great information. So welcome back, everyone. We've got about 15 more seconds. Everybody's coming back. And those of you who are in your larger groups, we want to welcome you back to this virtual space. It's fun to be able to like see you in your bigger groups, like doing the work, as well as pop into some of the breakout rooms. Y'all are having some great conversations. It's really, really exciting. Okay, everyone back, Heather? Everyone's back. Fantastic. Anyone want to share anything in the chat? Any good conversations that you had? I know I popped in and I heard some good kind of collaboration ways in which you were really trying to transition students from middle to high school and keep them on track. I heard some good conversations about just creating some of these systems. Jake, was there anything that you heard that you wanted to share, if you can even speak? I don't know. You have words to say.
I think the big thing, and I think if you took nothing away from that last section, is really just having conversations, right? Of how do we do things, how do we want to do things, and start to document that, and then use those reference point to kind of how do we get there, right? Even if it takes half a year. So that's really great.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to jump back in because we have so much that we want to share with you. Hopefully you can see my screen where we just went. Yes, thumbs up. Awesome. One of the things that I heard in one of my groups that I wanted to highlight as we move into thinking about data is some individuals were talking about, Jake talked a lot about how he would get emails. And so people were talking about what systems they have in place in order to move into providing tier 2 supports for a student. And so one thing we like to highlight, we have a lot of examples on Drive, is how does school staff request assistance for a student? Is this part of a larger MTSS or tier 2 system, or is this counselor driven? Like, is it just coming to you? Is it known? Does it include enough information right now for you to provide information? I know some people were saying, I just get these emails. And that's okay right now. And one thing you can do to make it easier for yourself would be to create something like what Hastings, Michigan did, right? Some sort of a Google form that, yes, you may still monitor, but then this would provide you with data that can inform the needs of the school, right? I like this. Some people are saying that this is what we're doing. We're creating a teacher referral, a separate one for parents. Someone in one of the breakouts room was talking about a bus driver who came and needed some support with a student. So how are we communicating this? How are we making sure that we have systems in place so that we're starting to collect data that we can then present and also utilize to assist our students? So some really good examples. And like Jake said, compare it, try some things, pilot it, see. Because really, and some of you also were having some great conversations and saying data is a strength for you because we're data-driven school counselors, which was awesome. But really thinking about what data is it that we're utilizing to inform the decisions that we're making around tier 2. Okay, so that's where we are in the systems data and practices. So in the chat, what data are you currently utilizing? I know some of you, even when we were talking in the tier 1, we're talking about some different universal screening, like MySabers that you've been utilizing. What data currently informs how students receive additional support? Or some groups were already talking about progress monitoring. Are you monitoring in your groups which students are successful, how they're successful? How do we know that they're getting information? So put some of that information in the chat. I'm going to keep talking just for sake of time, but the chat can be a useful way for us to just know, this school's doing this. Oh, okay. I guess maybe that's something I could shore up as I move forward. Okay. When we think about what our data needs to do, I love this. This is all Jake's little visuals. It's so great. We need to think about like the data that helps us know when a student should get in an intervention, right? Much like the lights on our car, like the brake light goes on, we know we've got to do something. Or do we have any data that's informing, oh yeah, okay, warning, this isn't working, right? Something in our universal tier 1 isn't working. How a student is doing while they're in an intervention. So we have to think about, is this intervention working, right? Much like the gas gauge tells us, should we keep going, or should we stop? Should we refill? Should we do something a little bit different? Or when a student is good to go, right? I love that this is the oil, because this is a very apt example, because I didn't know much about cars and I love this. But like if we have enough oil and we're good to go in the tank, like the student's good to go. Even if our principal is nervous about it, like Jake said, we need to move students back to tier 1 where they're still successful. So what data can we use? We know this, we're school counselors. Participation data, right? That's just tracking what we're doing for students. We want to be thinking about some outcome data, right? We should be looking at some of that big picture data like office discipline referrals, suspensions, expulsions, GPA, test scores, like where are our students, how are they showing up in that big picture data? We can begin to think about how we monitor how students are doing by using mindsets and behaviors data within the small groups that we're doing a simple 5-question pre-post survey that measures knowledge, attitude, and skills around mindsets and behaviors. That's a wonderful way to pre-post and to progress monitor what our students are getting. And we also can use supplemental data, universal mental health screening, school climate surveys. That's a great indication of which students may be feeling disconnected in our schools. How can we rope them into some sort of intervention for the short term to provide that sort of support? So in addition to some of that core data that we just talked about, or the request for assistance form, which is a form of data, we get to think about, are we utilizing family and student perspective? Like I loved that, I think it was Bray that said, I have a form for parents to request assistance. How are we utilizing that? Are we valuing the voices? What about students? Are we allowing them to say, you know what, I need some support right now. I need something. I don't know what it is, but I need something. So how do we expand the data that we're utilizing? If we're pretty good about using some of the, requests for assistance or office discipline referrals, or something else that we might want to add to be sure that we are capturing all students, especially when we're thinking about internalizing behaviors versus externalizing. Really important that we consider that. So what are some indicators of possible need? What's important within tier 2 is to think about what qualifies, okay? When will we provide some supports? So we might think about if there's a student who moves and they have received tier 2 services in the past, we might want to get them into something to provide that continuity, okay? Or students who enroll after the first 3 weeks of school. There's a lot of research about transiency and the impact that has on school belonging and academic outcomes and behavioral outcomes. Then we also are going to start to say, okay, we're going to start looking at 2+ ODRs within a specific time period, whether that's a month or 6 weeks, 6+ absences in a 30-day period, that student, teacher, or family request. Potentially, if there's a significant concern regarding mental health, we know a student is coming out of treatment, for example, we want to provide some sort of support instead of just say, okay, well, you were there, now you're here, good luck. Is there something happening within a family that we note is happening? Is that a reason that we might provide that? So these are some indicators, or even a 504 plan. We know for 504 plan for students with ADHD, for example, may need assistance with executive functioning. That's something that we can provide within our tier 2 support. Always with the awareness of making sure that we don't continually situate the problems within students, that we do engage in root cause analysis. And so if we see that there is some data and a lot of students having issues in a specific problem area, we want to look for trends. Are there potential causes outside of the students that could be within the way our buildings systems are happening, or the unstructured time, or the amount of supervision that we are providing, or a mismatch between a teacher and a student, which we know can lead to what looks like a tier 2 issue. And it may mean that we need to do some circles, or we need to engage in some conversations between student and teacher, so that we're always asking why, and not always just saying, oh, student with tier 2, here's where you go. You know, we've got to zoom out our lens every now and then to just ensure that we're doing what we need to do, what's best for students within systems that aren't always designed for them. So as we think about that, something that we're going to have one more breakout room after we talk about evidence-based supports and a little bit about tier 3, what we want you to be thinking about is, how are we going to define what data we use? What is a score that we are going to consider to be proficient? Tier 1, like this is what students in tier 1. So we often do that related to like numbers 8 and 9, reading and writing. But what we want to do in GPA, right? We want to start to define proficiency scores and at-risk scores that would allow us to identify students who need additional support. So for example, with discipline referrals, 0 and 1, you know, that makes sense. That's just being a kid. And when we start to get into 2 to 5, okay, we need to start thinking about, that's going to be one of those indicators that your tier 2 team is going to take a look at each time you meet. And when you see students who are on the edge, that's when you say, okay, what's one of those interventions from the menu of interventions that we have that we can align with this student, get them in within 48 hours, because we know that they're at risk for additional behavioral struggles. High risk we know is 6+, and that might mean that that student would need more intensive supports. So we utilize data in a lot of ways. This is to identify, right, warning lights on, what are we going to do? How are we going to help these students? So when we get to the small groups, you can even start this now. We have this on Google Drive. You can start thinking about, do we have this? What data do we have? How are we going to utilize this to identify students who need additional support? Okay. The second piece, of course, is monitoring what data are our interventions working? And so just want to highlight a couple of things before Jake talks about specific interventions related to progress monitoring. How do we know what we're doing is working? Now, this slide has a lot of words. Okay, so it's one that you might want to come back to later. And it's important because when we're thinking about tier 2, often where we falter is infidelity. Are we doing the interventions in the way that they were designed? So that means, like, we sometimes, if we're not the ones doing the intervention, we may need to have a fidelity checklist for the individuals who are, to make sure, yep, we're doing this as it is designed. And then we have to think about making sure that we're doing the intervention for 6 weeks, or at least so that we're starting to see an upward trend. We might want to keep going 2 weeks before and after vacations. We know those are really tricky times for kids. And we may have to modify an intervention with more intensive supports if after, we're not going to wait just 6 weeks, be like, oh, good luck, teachers, here's your 6 weeks. After 2 weeks, we might have to layer on, right, some mentoring, some additional form of support for a specific student, so that we're not just like, oh, we tried it, didn't work. Okay, let's try another thing for 6 weeks. Okay, didn't work. Okay. And we want to fade support. So I know when I was a school counselor, I had so many students in check-in and check-out, they didn't want to leave, right? They didn't want to leave check-in check. They love it because that attention is wonderful. So how do we fade that? Okay, let's start checking in maybe 3 times a week. Oh, do you want to be a helper for individuals who are coming into check-in and check-out? You can come with them. You can show them the ropes. So you're still getting that. So really thinking about how are we using our interventions the way they're supposed to, and how are we monitoring and making sure that we're doing what we say we're doing over the course of time. What does progress monitoring look like? So it may be that we've got an attendance group. We've defined our attendance cutoff points, and we know, so we're going to do a social, academic, and structural group. Jake's going to talk a little bit more about those. We might have those students use a daily report card. So they may also have some check-in and check-out data collection that's taking place. So we're going to monitor that as they move through this group. And then we're going to communicate with teachers and with families. Is this working or not? Okay, how are we doing with this attendance? We've got a couple of different attendance interventions specifically in the Google Drive. Other ways that we can do it, there's a really cool app. A lot of folks in Texas are using it. I don't know if anyone uses the Rhythm app to just that students check in about how they're doing each day. It's a great way to track if students are in a specific group. Anxiety groups, you can have students do just this each and every day and just kind of hand this to you. Pre-post tests, which we know about, which we can do paper, Google, Kahoots, etc. Or we can also have specific things. This is probably more elementary, but if a student is in a small group, a target behavior, and have either students rate it or staff members rate that behavior and successes. So it may not be a formal check-in and check-out, but other ways that we can just monitor. How is this going? How are we doing? So as we transition, I'm going to transition to give Jake the lead. I want you to just, in your form, individually, what data are you using? What else do you need? What's the next step? And what about progress monitoring? What are you doing or not doing? And what's the next step? What's the next step there? Okay. Okay, Jake, turning it over
Awesome.
to you.
Thanks, Jen. And I'm gonna just spend this next little session really just focusing on two things. Excuse me. One is I want to share with you evidence-based supports and make sure you know where that resources are, because likely it's going to be something that you go back to and you kind of explore. And then I also want to share with you a way to organize your tier 2 supports. So again, this fits within the practices, so things we're going to deliver directly with kids. And really, to go back to full circle with the teams, the tier 2 team really wants to kind of oversee and coordinate any of these interventions, right? To kind of know which kids are getting which, to be able to support the folks that are delivering the intervention, and to monitor progress, as Jen mentioned. And so we're sitting here in the tier 2 team. So I gave you some resources in terms of referencing evidence-based practices. It's a term that's thrown around a ton, I know, and I always think it's good for us to know as we're practicing in the buildings what that means, right? And so a lot of the evidence-based practices I'll share, it's a combination of research and kind of evaluations at school sites and districts and using data, but also things like, practitioner expertise, things we know that work kind of in the building. So it's kind of a combination of those things. Jen shared that resource directly. It's in your drive. There's more information about this as well, but I also want to jump over to research informed practices, because I'm going to share a couple of those that are free and pretty solid. And what that means is that those interventions have drawn from evidence-based practices or evidence-based interventions, which are more rigorously researched. For example, Milwaukee Public Schools kind of adapted strategies from evidence-based curriculum and kind of took from a different, or adapted from a couple different areas to create what works for them. And so that's research informed. They haven't done research to say, hey, based on our curriculum, what are the outcomes yet? But they have drawn from some really great things. So this is just, again, for reference for there. But what you'll find in the link that Jen provided and that's in your drive is this evidence-based practices resource. And this is basically so you don't have to go and Google and Pinterest things, or at least it'll hopefully save you some time. So what we've done over time is kind of kept track of curriculum research that's out there and kind of compile it for you. And so left-hand side, you'll see the intervention, the title, the link, if there's a link to a website, excuse me, or to a published book or something like that, or a manual. And then in the description, kind of what the topics are that it supports kids with. grade levels, kind of what the lessons are about, and then if there's any kind of a cost. And then on the far right hand side, again, it's if it's evidence-based or research informed or promising. So I want to highlight a couple, and some of these are free. And I know, you know, at the building level, if you're sitting as an individual counselor right now thinking, you know, I need something, how do I get it? If there's not resources, you know, there are some free good stuff here, but there's also some really low cost, whether it's at the building level or the district level, that once you kind of looked into this and explored, I've had lots of conversation with folks that there's no money and no motivation to spend any money, but once we look at kind of the need of kids, what it offers, and the resource that it would provide in terms of having like lesson plans already manualized for you, something like Coping Cat for $24 for anxiety is a lot of bang for the buck, just for example. So I didn't publish any of these. I'm not here to sell any of these, but I just think I encourage folks to kind of first look at the data. So what do our kids need? And then go to what do we have, right? And if you have stuff on that menu to meet kids' needs, then that's great. Just keep doing that, right? But if you look and you say, here's a kid's need, we don't really have something that really meets that anxiety, or maybe check in, check out, really building that relationship, setting goals, then come to this and explore and say, okay, can we add to what we already have to that menu? Is there anything in here that might be interesting? Okay. I want to highlight a couple on this page. The social academic instructional groups at the top there. That's the one I mentioned. It's K-12. There's classroom skills, social emotional skills, and attendance. Thankfully, Milwaukee Public Schools got their school psychs, admins, counselors, social workers together and developed their curriculum. And thankfully, they put it on their website. So you can go on there, check it out, download a couple of videos. And that's a good one. If you're sitting and you're saying, I do some groups, but I really just kind of develop my own stuff, activities, and kind of pull and kind of figure it out. This, I recommend going here, and they've thought it out, and there's a good scope and sequence and lesson plans. Okay. Student success skills is a lot widely researched group counseling curriculum that's pretty good. And then I want to go down to Trails for Wellness as well. It happens to be free. There's a lot on there that you can download in terms of lessons, and it really is more in the mental health realm in terms of depression, anxiety, coping, drawing on cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness. And so medical school, University of Michigan has done a lot of work in developing. There's some stuff that you have to do as part of training, but there's a lot that you can download for free and kind of use those activities. Okay, so again, the point of these are, if you have stuff that's working, great, but if you see a need, and don't go here first and say, oh, this looks cool, I'm going to start using it. Go to the needs first. So hopefully you have some data around or an idea about what kids need in your building. Then go to this and say, what's maybe one or two we can explore that kind of matches that need, right? And so the idea is these things would kind of fill in your menu of that tier 2 flow chart I showed you, in addition to anything that you have now that is working, both because you see it and you know it, but also hopefully you have some data points around that. And we'll have some time in a second, you can explore that list a little more. This is the second thing I want to highlight just in this little short section I'm doing. Again, the theme, one theme of today is to document things, right? And documenting is creating systems. So they're living, breathing documents that all staff can kind of contribute to and know about. And then that way, as teams change and as you develop things, these can kind of carry on and not just be dependent on some all-star counselor that's doing all this great work, and then they shift or leave or something like that, or you want to expand, you know, the reach of what you do, then other people can kind of know what things look like. So this is actually part of the tiered fidelity inventory. It's just been adapted a little bit. But the idea is this is a Word doc in your folder. You put your interventions you have in place at the top. And then the stuff on the left, the first, I don't know, 5 or 6 items there are all typical functions of behavior, right? So any behavior folks out there or school psychs or this will look really familiar. Typically when a student is showing a behavior, it's based on one of these functions of behavior, right? They're trying to get adult attention, peer attention, trying to avoid something. The idea is that you want to have enough interventions that meet a couple or most of these, right? It doesn't mean you have to, say, oh, we need 10 new things. Start with like one thing at the very, very max, right? So don't think I'm saying do all this at once, but the idea is that if a kid has a need, you'll be able to go to that menu and say, yeah, we have 3-4 quality things that can really match up to that. Because if you only have check in, check out, which is super great for lots of kids, super well researched, but it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't do everything for every kid. So you want to have a couple of different options. The stuff at the bottom of that left-hand side, those come from research and practice-based best practices, right? So you want to have structural prompts for what kids need to do throughout the day. You want to have some check-in times during the day for kids to get reinforced for the skills. You want home to be involved. So again, this is an inventory. You could fill it out now and just say, here's what we have at top, even if it's very informal. Hey, I meet with kids really informally at lunch, put it up there and just see what kind of needs it meets, right? And then as you go explore that list I showed you, you can add 1 or 2 at a time, even if it's 1 a year or whatever, and then you'll start to kind of flesh this out a little bit. Okay, so you have the blank version. The reflection question, the purpose of this is to say, what supports do we have in place for kids that have elevated needs? Okay, and if you say nothing, then that's fine, then you go back to that list. But what I'd really love you to do is just enter in what you do, formally or informally, see what it meets, and then say, what based on my kids' need, what do I need to add the most? Okay, so we really just hit on that bottom piece of the action planning worksheet, right? We hit on evidence-based supports. And again, I'm dumping that list on you, knowing that we don't have near enough time to kind of go through lots of that stuff. But that's a resource based on where you are. You go back to that after you looked at data. And then that template, again, you can do that now and just say, what do we have in place? And then that's your new menu, your catalog that you can kind of develop as you need to then use. So go ahead and take a couple minutes to make note of what do you have in place? What do you need? Next steps. Maybe it's using the inventory just to see where you're at this year, and then maybe think about next year. Is there anything we need to add? Or maybe you're good and you're like, Jake, I listed check in, check out. I listed mentoring. I listed individual. We're doing good. Just document those, right? If you've documented them, then you're good right now. Okay. All right. So I want to just end this little piece with letting you know if this is where you're at, kind of what does tier 3 look like, or if you're doing tier 2 really well with Fidelity. All this stuff has been a nice review, just to kind of let you know where this process goes, right? And again, some people do a separate tier 2 and tier 3 team. We did, just because of the need, where we had to spend on a weekly basis, we had to spend our half hour to an hour time just talking about kids getting individual interventions. But a tier 3 team, as you know, as folks know doing this, it's not something that a school counselor or any one person just kind of starts doing. You really do need that wraparound support with the experts in the room, monitoring kids, developing individualized interventions based on functional behavior assessment, which typically your school psychs or special ed staff at the building or district level are going to be involved in. So this is more than just, I'm going to meet with this kid individually for counseling. This is typically wraparound supports, including mental health, a much more intensive need, right? And so it's not a tier 3 kid. That's not the intention of this MTSS. It's the level of need or the intensity of need. So tier 3 is just intense, where these tier 2 groups I just went over, they're not enough of a support. Okay, so some cut points, and again, this is more of a reference point for if and when you get there. It's not meant to be like, this is everything you need to know about tier 3, but to give you a sense of indicators, if you're doing this tier 2 stuff well, things to think about that might say this kid might actually need tier 3 level support to add on to what we're doing at tier 2, is that if you're doing tier 2 for that 2 to 6 weeks and you're using those cut points and they're still just kind of all over the place, spiking up and down, even though you've done it with fidelity, even though it's been, the adults are kind of doing what they're supposed to do, that's when you might consider, tweaking it, or if you've done that it's just not individualized enough. So they need something really drilled down for their specific need. The 6 or more office discipline referrals, especially if that's in the fall, that's typically an indicator they might need some more individualized support. Again, 5 or more absences in a month, right? So we can, kids missing a substantial portion of school, there might be things going on, but also they're probably going to need at least academic support if they're missing that much. Definitely significant mental health concerns, documented or not. If there's kind of those more serious behaviors that are risk for safety at all. Sometimes students with IEPs, they have individualized supports, but that doesn't mean we can't give them individualized supports to supplement that. And then sometimes a teacher or family, is part of that request that they need more individualized than what more of those group supports can provide. Okay, so I'm trying to bring us down to a nice smooth landing from to use the airport analogy. But this kind of big picture, this is kind of how we can kind of combine this stuff that we've talked about, right? Is thinking about what do things look like across the tiers. We might set a SMART goal at the building level. This might be aligned with a district type goal. But in this example, if we want to increase graduation rates, we give it a timeline. And then we want to think, what do we do at tiers 1, 2, and 3 to be able to contribute to that overall goal, right? And so Jen hit on some stuff we can do across school-wide, aligning our school counseling work with that, what we do in the classroom, what we do with these school-wide events. I'm giving you lots of examples and resources for what you can do at tier 2 to contribute to that in a smaller group setting. And then obviously we can meet with kids one-on-one, but if it's tier 3 truly, then it's going to be part of more of that wraparound support. And then we can monitor that. So again, this is like wouldn't that be nice if it was that easy and smooth, but that's the approach we want to take, right? What's the goal? And then as school counselors, how can we individually or line up with what's going on school-wide to be able to contribute to that goal? All right, so I want to give us a chance to just spend a couple of minutes making sense of this. And Jen, if you don't mind doing the summary and then wrapping this up, that would be great.
Yep. Well, I'm hoping we can do like one more breakout. Let's take about 10 minutes. Okay. And Jake, do you want to go to the next slide and we'll do the summary at the end? We want you to just try to make sense of this. So you've got 2 options for this. You can focus in on tier 2 and all that great information that Jake and I just shared, or you can go overall and really think about what are the strengths of your school's tier 1 and 2 systems, data, and processes. How are you aligning? Are there areas in which you can move forward? So I want to take 10 minutes for you to really make sense of this, and you can choose what makes most sense for your group and what your needs are. But let's just jump into our groups so that you have time to talk. Thank you, Heather. That's perfect.
All right, the breakout rooms are open, so please join. And you'll have about 10 minutes. And again, if you are not assigned to a room, please let us know, because we will use these rooms again in the afternoon.
Welcome back, everyone. We are here. We are going to wrap up our time with you. I know you have a fantastic rest of the day where you're going to get to continue to put into practice some of the things that we've shared with you. I'm excited for your state. That's what I'm excited for, because there's just a lot of really, really good things that are going to be happening. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to wrap things up. We really enjoyed being with you all today. For some reason, I can't share my screen anymore, so I'm just not going to. I'm going to wrap it up with you all just like this. I put a link in the chat to an evaluation, and as you're doing that, what we just want to remind you of, really the big picture things, is we want you to just take it slowly. think about the small ways, the foundation that you are building. Start with strong tier 1 and your strong school counseling program that you get to align. That's where you're going to begin, and know that you're going to do that in a team setting. Okay. You cannot do this work alone. We do not expect for you to do this work all by yourself. You can't do it. So take some time, do the evaluation. And as we're leaving, we would love for there to be one positive that you've gotten out of this morning, whether it's a connection that you made with someone in a chat room, whether it's an aha moment that you had, as whether it's a resource that you're going to look into. Please be sure to put that in the chat as you're leaving. I did again put the eval. It's real short. It only has about 8 or 10 questions. So be sure to fill that out and share with us what's a positive. What's a positive takeaway? I'll write this too. A positive takeaway from this morning. Thank you, Whitney, for getting us started. Tier 2. So creating that tier 2 team. Fantastic. Tammy, you're happy with all of those Jake Olson resources. He is a purveyor of tier 2 resources. We love it. Streamline, simplify, evidence-based practices, templates. Yeah, y'all, we want you to use these. So make sure that you download these resources so that you have access to them this afternoon. Make sure you keep a hold of them. Getting together, seeing what others are doing, hearing this with the school counselors' lens to apply what we're doing in with the Kentucky MTSS. 5-minute mental health lessons. Yes. So it's what everyone takes something different from these times that we have with you all, and know that we just appreciate you showing up. We wish you a happy school counseling week and a really, really great rest of your day. So Heather,
Yeah.
we're going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I can tell by the chat, and I think the conversations, this was very useful and perfect to segue into this afternoon. So I cannot tell you how much we appreciate you all taking time to join us today virtually, and they got collaboration time. So this has been amazing. So thank you all again. So we will be back promptly at 12:45. We're jumping right in with a quick mindful minute, and then myself and Dr. Melissa Wainwright, we will jump into our Kentucky MTSS model to make sure that we're all finished by 3 o'clock. So enjoy your lunch and take stretch breaks and have fun. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
All right, so like we mentioned, so I'm Heather Bushelman, your coordinator for comprehensive school counseling. Same from this morning, so I know we had an amazing morning, and I'm gonna let Dr. Wainwright introduce herself.
Yes, I'm Dr. Melissa Wainwright. I'm the MTSS coordinator for the state of Kentucky. Prior to coming here, I was at OVEC, and I've been a part of these school counseling cadres for some time and worked with the school counselors at OVEC. I love working with school counselors and couple that with MTSS, and it's definitely in my sweet spot. And prior to that, I have experience as a building administrator working with developing an MTSS team. I also studied it academically, and I feel like today we're going to have some opportunities to work together to help you put the information from this morning and continue to put that into the plan that's best for your school. Thanks for having me today.
So just a reminder, please make sure you have your full name as your Zoom introduction and your cooperative. So if you just left it on, it should be the same, but that's going to help us know where you're from when you're asking questions and your comments. And again, similar to this morning, we are going to take breaks on your own. We do want to get finished by 3 o'clock to respect your time. And we just want to ensure that you take care of yourself and it's a safe space to get up as needed. We are going to schedule 3 different breakout groups, which will be the same as this morning. So again, if you are not assigned to a room as we go into the first tier 1 activity, please make sure to let us know so that way you can collaborate with other counselors from all around the state. All right, so today's purpose is you have heard more of the national model for MTSS, which was perfect for what we're going to do this afternoon. And like you heard Jennifer and Jake discuss, we have been in collaboration with their group, as well as ASCA, to create our Kentucky MTSS model, because this was a huge need from around the state. Like you heard this morning, we're struggling to know where counselors fit in, how involved are we, what is our role. So in Kentucky, we're going to have a model that we're going to discuss and kind of shape today of what that looks like moving forward. So we're going to collaborate with Dr. Wainwright, since she is our Kentucky MTSS director, about the shared vision. We've been working on this for a couple of months, if not longer, I think. And we do want to have the shared vision and consistency around the state of what we are doing as school counselors with the KY MTSS. We're going to look at the integration between Kentucky MTSS, the ASCA model, and our counseling framework of best practices. You all have seen, it just was updated about 3 weeks ago, and that's on the KDE Comprehensive School Counseling website. If you have not seen it, we do have some additions to that document. So, and then we're going to look at creating your own model of MTSS. So you have seen resources, ideas, and in our breakout rooms this afternoon, this is where you will really start building your own model. You're going to collaboratively do it together. Those of you in person, you'll be able to print out just a blank template to start writing ideas of what are you doing you know is working well, but then where do you want to go next? If not this school year, for next school year. Even though it's February, we're already thinking ahead of what we're going to be doing. And at the end, we'll do an optimistic reflection and next steps, because we do want to gauge, number one, obviously what you've learned from today that was valuable, and number two, what are next steps for you, your district, your school, your cooperative, and so we'll discuss that at the end. Okay, all right,
And-
Dr. Wainwright, you're up.
And from this morning, you were given an MTSS definition by the presenters, and you'll most likely notice that the one for Kentucky has a lot of the similar language. And in Kentucky, we have a multi-level prevention system, and it is to support the student achievement, social emotional background, and it's integrating core instruction, assessment, and intervention. We want to today really hone in on that prevention system and thinking about the whole child. And one of the purposes for MTSS, next slide, please, is to promote that integration of systems level approaches. All throughout the morning, you heard both presenters talk about having systems to write your steps down, write where you are down so that you can make the next step forward. That is the same for the Kentucky framework, and it is a system level approach that we have what's called an integrated systems framework, an integrated connected systems framework, where we work with states, districts, schools, and trying to keep them all under one umbrella. Next slide, please. You'll notice on this next slide, lots of things under the umbrella that may resonate with you as you think about all the things that you do to provide students the support they need. You may have other things that you would put under this umbrella, but this is to show that all of those different initiatives come together under one framework. We're going to continue to build that this afternoon. Keep this in mind as you think about the different initiatives that you have as a school counselor. And again, as you had this morning, it is a layered 3-tiered model with the tier 1 for supports for all of our students in our buildings, tier 2 for some, and tier 3 for those that need more intensive individualized instruction, support, and interventions. And really be thinking about your tiers as we work through this today, and you'll have time in your breakout rooms for each of those tiers. And you may have seen this before in Kentucky. Our KYMTSS has 6 elements. And around that is the equitable access and opportunity, thinking about that in terms of all that we do. In the center is that tiered delivery system with academics, behavior, and social emotional. And then around the circle in blue, we have evidence-based practices, we have our teaming structure, we have our database decision-making, and our family, school, and community partnerships. All of that and those 6 elements encompass KYMTSS. For today, we will specifically think about our tiered delivery system and then remembering those other elements as we go. And again, thinking about the whole child as we think about the tiered delivery system. As school counselors, I think one of the just skills that most school counselors have is to think about a student holistically. As we think about building that tiered delivery system, we want to make sure that we're balanced with our academic, behavior, and social emotional supports that we provide, and keeping that whole child as the center of our work. And I think as school counselors, being a champion for that with other educators is very helpful as well.
Okay, so I'm going to show you the draft. Let me get out of my big screen. This is right now still in draft mode, only because right now it is going through editing and it's almost finished. But it may be another week or 2 before it can actually be publicly released on my website for KDE. But this is our document that is for our Kentucky school counselors for MTSS. So this will help you just reference back to as we go along today, we're going to talk about who else needs to hear this information that you've heard today to advocate for your role within MTSS. And this backs up everything with legislation and research. And of course, like I said, ASCA and the school counselors for MTSS have helped me and Dr. Wainwright develop this document. So it is approved. So again, it's just in a week or 2, it should be ready for actual public release where you can print it, tag it to your website, your social media, whatever you want to do. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just so you can see it. As we scroll down through, you can see it just kind of references the why behind why is this needed right now. As school counselors, we know we have to be experts in social emotional, academics, and college and career readiness. And as me and Dr. Wainwright were talking through this, it was getting lost about where should we fit in? Are we only SEL based? No. Are we only behavior based? No. Do we only focus on the college and career piece? No. So that's where we were like, we need to figure out a way to just have examples and a sample of in your buildings, this is where you fit in. And it's just like you heard Jennifer and Jake talk about today with the appropriate and inappropriate, how we are not coordinating everything, but we are very much involved with the teams who are making these decisions, because you all know, as school counselors, we are very much the advocates for our students, and making sure other staff and stakeholders understand their needs better than they might if it was a separate team. So we've referenced the position statement that you saw this morning. It's within the document. Dr. Wainwright has also referenced our Kentucky MTSS model that your districts are already recommended to be using. So I'm sure most of you have seen that, seen the language. Your schools are talking about it. If they're not, they're probably in the developmental stages of getting that going. I know it is, recommended from our State Department. And then we've also referenced our framework. So this Kentucky framework of best practices for school counselors, it does talk about how one of our practice elements is the principles of multi-tiered systems of supports. And so that is another reason that this is very much needed within our realm of work. And there is a regulation about it as well. Within the KRS regulation 158, it does talk about School counselors or school-based mental health providers will provide training, guidance, assistance, and utilizing interventions and strategies to support the learning needs of students. So again, there is a regulation that mentions our work and us within supports and interventions. And so I think for me, whenever we talk about who else needs to hear that, these are great references, because it's not just, well, we're supposed to, or it's, what's best for kids. It's obviously research-based and evidence-based of why we are having to be a part of this work in a bigger realm, which we'll discuss here in just a few minutes. So that's kind of some background. Your second page of this document that will come out is a crosswalk. I know for me, when I was a school counselor and when Dr. Wainwright and we were talking about this, we want to ensure we're not working in silos. So we don't want to have to reference 16 different documents to figure out where do we fit in. So we thought this was a nice, neat, clear-cut example from our 6 elements in Kentucky. And then our counseling framework. It's already there, we have it, but now it narrows it down to where does our framework practice elements fit into our MTSS elements from Kentucky? And then where does that connect to the ASCA model? We know best practices, we are supposed to be building comprehensive school counseling models. This is how it all ties in together. So for example, for the first one, if we're thinking about equitable access and opportunity, these are your elements to consider about how to implement it, what kind of the recommendations you're supposed to be following, and then it manages and delivers as part of your ASCA model as you start creating that. So this is just a nice thing to have because it doesn't make you have to do 3 different things at one time, if that makes sense. So it's all together and it's already tied there for you. So when you do consider the teams, like they mentioned this morning, who's a part of them, your role in them, which tiers for some of your program to consider. We've added some of the tiers like tier 1, 2, or 3, or just tier 3. So that way it kind of specifies again, oh, that's really not a tier 3 intervention or support. That's more of a tier 2. Again, just to help narrow it down. So you will have that table as well. And then this is our actual drawing model, whatever you want to call it. And again, this is a little bit messy because it's really hard to create a triangle with all these lines if you haven't tried it yet. So this is essentially what it will look like. And again, it's based off ASCA and Kentucky and the school counselors for MTSS. So as we go along today, we have broken each of these tiers apart. So that way we'll dive a little bit deeper into these so you can see, okay, here are your recommendations. Now, specifically, what do you do at your school to meet some of these things? Is it going to be perfect overnight? No. Is it going to be perfect by next year? Absolutely not. But these are things recommended by our groups that we heard from this morning and from ASCA of what, as counselors, we need to consider when we are discussing MTSS for our 3 domains: academic, college career, and then SEL. So that will help us narrow down in your breakout groups certain curriculums you're using, resources, types of groups, best practices, meetings you may be having on behalf of kids. So that's where we're going to dive deep today. So when you walk away, you're going to have examples of your own MTSS model to where you go back to your building. This is something you would be able to show to your administrators, your districts, anybody else who's a stakeholder who may need to see it, families, of what you will offer in your school counseling program. So again, that's a draft. So don't print it and don't take it and run with it just yet. It's almost ready. Okay. All right. So as we think about our work today, I know that a lot of you all have seen this, but this is where our focus is with MTSS. In regulations, we do have a use of time. We are supposed to be meeting as school counselors. And actually that data is almost ready to be distributed publicly, which is exciting because we had 100% of our districts turn that in this year. So we want to focus our time on 60% in front of students. That's leading large groups, class lessons, small groups, individual counseling. But that's where the majority of our time is recommended to be in Kentucky. Nationally, it's 80%. So we're working on that, which will be amazing. But even getting to 60% is a game changer, because especially at that tier 1 level, which is where you want to be the most of, and to make the most impact. So like they said this morning, you're not intervening your way out of a tier 2 issue or out of a tier 1 issue. So that's what you need to think about as we go along and you get into your breakout groups is, what are you actually doing in front of kids? How are you teaching, small group wise, individual? And of course, there's the ASCA student mindsets and behaviors, which we're not going to get into today, but I wanted to make sure we reference that just so you know, that kind of leads us into what we're supposed to be teaching our students based on that data that they talk so heavily about this morning. The appraisal and advisement. Think about when you think about your MTSS model, how are you assessing and analyzing your students' abilities, interests, skills, and their achievement? That doesn't mean you're the back, and it doesn't mean you're running that. That has nothing to do with this. But do you understand what abilities your students have to be able to build some aspects of your program academically or SEL or college career? And then, of course, what recommendations based on those assessments are you able to use? You go into your MTSS team, how are you using that data to discuss students and tier 1, maybe issues that you could maybe improve with your program, or a tier 2 group, whatever it may be. And then, of course, counseling. There's different types of counseling, which we've referenced today, just to make sure you're aware of the 3 types of counseling we focus on based on our ASCA model, just to consider when you're filling out your triangle today. Okay, and then, of course, you've got your indirect services. So this is 20% of your time. And these are the meetings you hold on behalf of your students. You're talking about your students. You're meeting with a lot of different stakeholders in this realm. And if it's a little bit above 20%, that's great. But again, we want 60 to be in front of kids, 20 to be these meetings on behalf of your students. So obviously, what referrals can you make on behalf of your students? Do they need a community-based agency for therapy? Possibly a tutoring agency, some type of job shadowing opportunities for college and career. Any type of contacts you can make with that counts for this. Consulting. Again, you are the expert in academics, college career, social emotional. You're not just an SEL teacher, so you have to be an expert at all of that. Now, is that going to happen overnight? No. But essentially, they're all going to come to you asking all these different questions. So you need to think about, number one, what is your genius? You all have geniuses. I mean, a lot of them. So considering that, what are you an expert when families call you, when your administration comes to you, when your staff comes to you about different students? What are you consulting them about? Trauma informed, behavioral, mental health. Again, on behalf of those students. And then collaboration. I think you're going to see today, after we're finished, all the collaboration school counselors have within their programs. Sometimes it may be more than others within your buildings just because of your expertise and your role. What teams are you on? Obviously, you should be a part of your MTSS teams, but what does that look like? Do you have 2 or 3 different MTSS teams? I hope not. I know with a recommended guidance, that's not what's supposed to happen. Family workshops, community partnerships. Again, all of this is student driven. So it's not just, it's fun, we're going to do this. What is your data telling you of different types of collaboration that may need to be happening for some of your students? And then we did reference again, like they showed you this morning, but just so you have it, this document, of course, never gets old for us. Your appropriate and your inappropriate activities. And we wanted to make sure you had this because, of course, in Kentucky, this is what we recommend, and we know it's not going to be overnight change, but this is what we are advocating and promoting when we talk to administrators, superintendents, district office personnel, anybody that we can show this is where our school counselors are really served and what's best for students and what they should be doing. And again, they reminded you this morning. Down here is always the big question I get about coordinating the MTSS. We don't coordinate all of it. but you are going to be a leader within this work in your buildings. Absolutely. But you're not in charge of every bit of it, which is a very different role. So, all right. So I just want to show you a snapshot of kind of big picture where everything's coming from as we kind of dig in a little bit deeper this afternoon. Okay, so Dr. Wainwright, I think we're ready for you. Oh, I hope she didn't lose her power again.
We're just about to, there we are. We're just about to go into our breakout rooms. And before we do that, wanted to go through, again, talking about that layered slide. Tier 1 is support for all students. And when we think about that, think about all the students in your schools. You're going to think about what data are available and what might those students need for support for all the students in your school. After that, after all students receive their tier 1, there will be students who need additional support in tier 2. We want to think about those for students who would need primarily some small group intervention support. And I want to say that as school counselors, you may or may not be providing all of that tier 2, but you would be coordinating it. And that's what we want today for, if you are not already, making the thought that I want to be more collaborative with other people in my school, that I don't have to do all of this alone. And then, as you know, there are students that need that more intensive support, that more individualized support, and that's tier 3. And those would be students that you may or may not provide their services. That may be finding community partnerships, other mental health agencies to provide that support. And all of that you would want to have collaboration with and facilitation with. And I want to also say that this morning, the talk was about MTSS for school counselors, but I also want to say that it's important to have a voice at the table for your school, your school-wide MTSS structure, where you would be representing the school counseling program, you would be representing the whole child and being a member of that team. And that is separate from your work. Well, not separate, but it's a different role than maybe you've thought about MTSS before. And you'll be a part of that MTSS team and then facilitating that tiered delivery model for your comprehensive school counseling program. And one of the things I like to remind people when we think about tier 1, because it's what do, and actually if I could insert in there, my students, the students in my building need. For example, take school A. They may be a community with college and career readiness, that college and graduate school and visiting college is a part of their family dinner time. Whereas in school B, college and career readiness may not be something that our students are familiar with. Go back to school A. They may have a lot of anxiety, and we may need to put tier 1 anxiety support for all of our students. Then there still may be some tier 2 students that need additional support for anxiety. And what I want you to think about from this is that the school down the road may have programs and supports and interventions that they use that your data don't indicate that you need in your tier 1. Think about your data and what is it that your students need. Going back to school B for college and career readiness, I would want to be exposing those students to opportunities, because most likely at their dinner tables, that's not the discussion. They would have other needs, and that would be in your tier 1. Just to be thinking about that as you're talking with school counselors from other schools, you may or may not have all of the same programs, supports, and instruction in your tier 1.
Okay, so it's a little bit blurry because I had to blow it up, so I hope you all can see that pretty well. So this is the screenshot from your Tier 1 Kentucky model. So this is that document I just showed you. Now, a lot more blown up and is very specific just for your Tier 1. So as we glance at our Tier 1 level, number one, it's equity driven, direct and indirect prevention for all students. So this is really where a brunt of our time should be focused. Because if your Tier 1 is not done with fidelity, you all know your Tier 2 is going to be so just outrageous, and you're putting out fires, which leads to burnout, and your kids will not get served, your staff will be struggling, and you especially will be struggling because and some of it is systemic change. So just please make sure with your Tier 1, really consider what's happening and how do you know it's working. So of course, with all three of our domains, large group instruction is essential. So as we go into our breakout rooms in just a minute, consider what lessons are you teaching and how do you know what to teach? Is it you've always done it that way, so we're just going to keep doing it? Is it you're just following a scripted program like Second Step? Or are you using the ASCA mindsets and behaviors to figure out what to teach? So that would be something to consider is it fluff or is it really data driven of what you know you need to teach? Or are we only focusing on themes and really trying to focus on that versus what our students need? So of course, large group instruction is a big part of Tier 1. And then, of course, if you look at your academics, family trainings, what do you help with your families as students transition from grade level to grade level? Do they understand just grades and how are they graded? How will their students show their progress in that grade level? Testing, what does that look like in different grade levels? What are the expectations for credits, dual credit, things like that? Consulting and collaborating with stakeholders. So think about in each domain, how are you consulting and collaborating about academics or about SEL? Who do you talk to about that within your program to know if what you're doing is enhancing the Tier 1 or if you're part of planning it, coordinating it, whatever that looks like. School-wide initiatives obviously is huge. I hope you have, a voice with that as far as how to plan different activities and school-wide, showing that leadership of what different things look like. The ILP, it will hit all three of these domains if it's implemented the correct way, which we know is still a work in progress for a lot of us, but essentially your individual learning plan is SEL based. And it also is going to help enhance college and career and your academic domains for your counseling program with how it's implemented. Any type of transition activities you have and different types of screeners or assessments you're thinking about, make sure you're thinking about that as you go into your small groups. And then of course, how do you know as far as like bullying prevention, what does that look like in your building? Does your staff know protocols, how to be proactive before it gets out of control, goal setting, calming spaces, wellness check-ins? So you can see it's a variety of different things. And keep in mind, does this mean you have to be doing every single one of these things to have a comprehensive MTSS model? No. But this is your recommended guidance for activities and meetings you will have on behalf of students to consider. So this is your starting point to look at, what am I doing well that I know is working? And then what maybe do I want to grow on next year? What's one thing I might want to implement? So that's what we want to think about today. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're about to go into our breakout rooms. Again, they will be the same as this morning. If you were not assigned to one after we open them up, please just put in the chat and we will assign you to a breakout room, because this is essential to help us collaborate together as a whole state, not just within your district or your region. It's always amazing to hear what everybody is doing. And I know from this morning, it was very valuable, the conversations that were happening. And then as you get into your breakout rooms, I think a couple of you saw a little bit of a glimpse of this morning. So for my in-person co-ops, you'll be using the blank template of that triangle. It should make you force copy it, so that way it's yours. You can dive into it, type away, print it, write on it, whatever you choose to do. All of my virtual people, so you are going to be on a Jamboard. And if you've never used Jamboard before, it's really neat. It's like a moving PowerPoint of a Google slide. So very quickly, let me give you a glimpse of that if you've never seen it before, and then we'll get into our rooms. So it's trying. There it is. Okay. Yeah, so you can see a few people have already kind of jumped into it. So this is what our Jamboard looks like. And every picture or every slide, there's one for every single group. So if you were in room 2, you will go up at the center, the top center right there. You're going to click on that arrow. It will take you to room 2. If you're in room 5, click that arrow at the top center and you'll go to room 5. So that way we can keep separated all of your comments. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot in one room, and I don't want you to get overwhelmed. So we want to use your Post-it notes. So if you go to the left-hand side, the 4th icon down is called a sticky note. When you click on that, it has all these beautiful, pretty colors. We're going to use 2 different colors just to show the differences between. Yellow will be your indirect services. So as you collaborate in your breakout rooms, type in your ideas of what meetings you are having on behalf of students. And again, you won't put 10 of them on one sticky note. Every sticky note is one idea, okay? And then you'll label it. So if you are consulting with a parent about a student's ILP, you could then label that AC for academic, or CC for college career, or SEL, or put all 3 of them on there. So you also want to label them, so that way you can kind of see, wow, our group really has a lot of SEL based direct services and indirect services, but we're struggling for the academic piece. And then the blue, you can just click on the little circles to change it the color. The blue will be your direct service. So that will be where you will type in, use Second Step as a bullying prevention lesson for grades 4th and 5th grade, something like that. Then you can label it SEL. And then once you're finished, you'll click save. And then you can see there's my little Post-it note. And you can resize it. You can do just like you would any shape you might do in Google Docs. You can make it smaller, make it bigger. And if you don't like it, you can delete it. Okay. So that's how you use Jamboard. And I know our facilitators will help you make sure you know how to. And I think facilitators, you may be able to share your screen, but if not, just kind of help navigate that. Okay. Okay. All right.
Heather, would you be
Yes.
able to put the link for the Jamboard in the chat, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was just about to do that.
Oh,
you.
thank you.
No, you're fine.
We had someone ask for that in the
Yes.
chat.
Let's see. It's coming if you'll let me. Sorry. There it is. I have like 7 screens open. There we go. Okay. That should be the Jamboard link. All right. Okay. So, oh, not yet. We're going to give you, we're going to take about, let's do 12 minutes in your breakout rooms. Let me stop sharing my screen so that way you all can be able to see everything. Again, the breakout rooms will be the exact same. So if you did not get assigned to one, please let us know so that way you can be able to collaborate with everybody else from around the state. And if you need anything, obviously use the chat, and we'll see you back in about 12 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. First of all, thank you for your patience with the technology. Did not realize Jamboard apparently has a limit. I've used it before, never knew that was a thing. So I appreciate your patience and a lot of your creativity, because a lot of you were in it. So I appreciate that. For my facilitators, maybe when we jump to tier 2, you might just only you access the Jamboard, and just to see if that may help, since there's really only technically like 9 of you. So, but again, if it doesn't work, then we'll just keep writing down everyone's ideas, because all of this will be compiled into one list after we're finished today. So you're going to get all your ideas regardless of how we input them. So thank you. So I would love to hear some of you share out, just so other groups can see what everyone was doing. And let me share my screen so we can see the actual Jamboard. Okay, so from group 1, does anybody want to kind of highlight anything from your group that you really liked, that you thought was valuable? Like the teacher meetings at the beginning of the year. I think that's interesting. That's different.
Can you say that again? Because you cut out a little bit.
I was looking how group 1, you all put, you have teacher meetings at the beginning of the year. Thought that was interesting as collaboration and consulting. Okay. All right. All right, group 2.
We did have a question in the chat for group 1, and it was about the men's. Let's see here. Elaborating on the men's group.
Yeah, can somebody from group 1, can you all share about the young men's club that you do for your small group, or would you like to wait for that for tier 2? Doesn't matter.
We'll hold that chat till tier 2 unless they're ready to share about it.
All right, group 2, does anybody want to share something that stuck out to them? Co-ops, you all can feel free to jump in. So no, you're not really on the Jamboards.
It looks like there's a lot of collaboration going on between school counselors and mental health people. So that is very valuable.
Yeah, I agree, Sally, especially the tier 1 level. Very valuable. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, our last elementary group, anything else? Group 3, anything that stuck out to you in your conversation? I see a lot of direct services.
I think we probably had a whole lot more to add than what we did add by
Okay.
looking at the others. You know, I feel like we could have added a lot more for tier 1.
All right, thank you, Tammy. Yeah, because it looks like you got a great start though. Yeah, a lot of direct services. Okay, we'll go to our middle school. Group 4, anything that stuck out you'd like to share with the group or highlight?
No, it took us a minute to get in, Heather, and we focused on tier 1 for this breakout. But mostly just serving on committees where we could advocate for students, like our MTSS teams, and then the PBIS team. We had school-wide things like the suicide prevention, bullying prevention, things like that.
Okay, yeah. Yes, it looks like you all had a good mix of indirect and direct, so good. Okay, all right, middle school group 5, anything that you would like to highlight from your group?
And we also just focused on tier 1 and got a little late start, but we had you can see by our list, we have a variety of things. And then one of the real interesting conversation is that, where is it, Matt? I can't find it. Character Strong both had direct and indirect services.
Yeah,
that
so
kind of
it's blue and yellow. That's not a mistake or anything. It's, they provide both.
Yeah.
So that stood out. And then I love, I think it was Mark, sorry, Mark, the staff inclusion and attendance awards. And that was like, he said it, and then we had to leave our breakout room. So we didn't get to expand on it, but we like that was brought in there as well. Matt, was there anything else that you want to go over?
No, but I see in the chat someone asked about tassel, and I do not know. So whoever from our group offered that, I'm going to let you explain that.
I'm not sure. I don't remember who it was, to be honest with you. If you were the tassel person, even if you could put it in the chat,
Yeah.
and share, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, thank you all. I will say for Character Strong, I know Dr. Clayton Cook is a big part of that group now and planning all the systems with it and the lessons. So I'm a huge advocate and follower of him for several years now. He's amazing with MTSS, tier 2, tier 3, behavioral interventions. So even if you don't use that curriculum, some of his like his Twitter feeds and things like that are really valuable. Just some things to consider as you're moving along with behavior and some SEL initiatives. All right, group 6.
This is my group. We were a solo group of one.
Oh, we appreciate you. Love
I
it.
didn't want you to think we didn't do the task. So I had her join another group so she could collaborate with other people.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, to finish up middle school, anything that stood out from group 7? It's interesting some of the shift we see, I think, in more of the college career readiness now that we're moving up in the levels. If you notice that, it's very interesting, which a lot of that is so SEL based. Which I think as school counselors, we know that, but some do not see it that way. Okay, all right. Anybody from group 8?
I'll talk a little bit. Now, I don't have access to a computer. I'm on my iPhone and looking at this on a small screen, but I'm a counselor at Franklin County High School. My colleague, Bill Robbins, is here next to me watching this as well. But we were talking with in our group about that we have a lot more of these activities that contribute to the tier system than maybe we initially thought. But the biggest thing we think of is kind of organizing and maybe communicating a little bit more about those programs. But you know, just like at our school, we meet individually with seniors to address their needs, individual meetings, you know, at the beginning of the year with them and kind of see them through the year, checking in with them periodically. We have an advisory / nest time every day. And through that, we address the SEL. We address RTI needs, as well as students signing up for their own academic help. And also working on ILPs as well during that time. We've done some outreach activities in the year with KIA to explain to students about the KEYS scholarship and how, you know, the connection between good grades and money. earn for scholarships. And then we have a variety of small groups. One that comes to mind is Crush, and that's a group for students who have an incarcerated relative. But we have various groups for our students. So those are some of the things we thought of. But again, things that we think of that we need to do is, again, just getting a little bit more organized, a little bit more communication, and also examining the data to drive our next steps.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of extra things that weren't in here. So hopefully by the end of our time, you can make sure to add those in. I'm sure some of those were valuable for others to hear that you're doing at the high school level. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Group 9. Anybody want to share from that group for our last group? Well, if you think of something, you're more than welcome to put it in the chat. Okay, so we got through our first Jamboard breakout room. Yay, this is huge. With a few hiccups. So thank you all again for being patient. Okay, Dr. Wainwright, do you want to go ahead and start discussing tier 2?
Don't do that. Yes. Some great things on the Jamboard there. And as you go into tier 2 work, you can add from what you've heard today. You can add that on your tier 1 if you would like to. As you've heard all day, it's a layered tier delivery system. So this would be in addition to all that you just discussed about tier 1. And this we're going to move into would be the tier 2. You spent a lot of time listening and hearing about that this morning. And I feel like that was a really great explanation of tier 2. I do want to address something that might be a point of confusion in relation to that, which is that tier 2, and it was stated to have a separate team for that. And I totally would support that as a separate secondary team. I would still encourage you to be a part of your school-wide team that is for your school-wide umbrella, and then having your tier 2 team that you wanted for your tier delivery model for tier 2. I want to make sure that if anyone has a question about that, because as I was listening, I thought it was a great explanation of MTSS and the tier 2 instruction, support, and interventions. That being said, I wouldn't want you to be confused with the school-wide MTSS team, which looks at the whole school academic, behavior, and social emotional data.
Yep.
And as long as that's clear, I'm ready to go on into the next slide, tier 2, where you're going to think about what are the direct and indirect services that you would provide. And here you can see some questions to consider. So who needs tier 2? What is manageable and ethical to meet the needs of our students? And we really want to think about that as we're building a team. We also want to think, what's a manageable team? That depends from school to school, what's manageable, but what represents the needs of your students. So what's manageable, what's ethical? You would decide what percentage of tier 2 supports that you're going to be able to provide. And then realizing that you may not provide all of them, but you would be facilitating the process. And then thinking about what stakeholders may be used to help in providing those. So if you're not the one providing it, who might have a skill and expertise in that area to be able to provide that intervention? And Heather, I love on there that be creative, think outside of the box. That's another great reason to have a team that's supportive of your work and working with you, because you're not then in a silo all by yourself. There's something about synergy of a group that is there for a specific goal. And I think in that group, you can generate some really creative ideas. As you listen to some of your peers in your grade levels, as you go into breakout rooms, listen to each other's creative ways of meeting the needs of tier 2 students.
Yeah. Yeah, I think based on what you mentioned, Melissa, and then what they mentioned this morning, is if we try to silo all this and only, oh, this is only the counselor, it is not going to happen. You all know that, especially with the needs of our students. And so being creative is something you have to almost think outside the box of. If you have certain groups you would like to build based on your data, certain interventions, who would be best to tag on to those, especially if it's skills that aren't necessarily like counseling skills. Like, you know, you wouldn't give a grief group to necessarily like your PE or health teacher, but those are the type of stakeholders that could essentially lead a group for coping skills or impulsivity or self-management, because of the way they think about the brain and the body and all the energy. And so that's where we think about, okay, who can I maybe start looking at that has some geniuses, that, you know, they're all of our kids, which is what we promote, of course, in our buildings, but that could help you ensure you are meeting the needs of students and think about it in a different way, not just through a counseling lens. So yeah, so very important.
And if we go back to that, the video that they showed at the very beginning, thinking about that of our staff also, that they may have, there may be seasons where they're able to support in a role, and they may have a life issue that goes on or something that's happening, and there may be a season where they're not, and someone else will emerge. I loved how that video really gave the feelings of and the background of the students and the adults.
So as we think about now tier 2, this is the snapshot, sorry if it's a little blurry, again, of your draft for our Kentucky MTSS school counseling model. So this is what we want to consider as you go back into your breakout groups in just a minute, at all 3 domains: academic, college careers, social, emotional. What are you doing and what do you offer at tier 2? I love how this morning they really kept saying that is within your system, what is there? You know, you hopefully don't have to recreate the wheel every single year of what your supports are. Now, your small groups may look different, of course, based on needs. But if you're doing, a lot of you say check in, check out, that's probably an annual system. So that one's already there. But what else are we doing besides that? And so I love how they really kept reiterating what is there that your school can provide for your tier 2 interventions and supports based on student need. So for example, data and student driven small groups. And I think that's the big one to consider is thinking about your system of how do you build your small group? Is it, like they mentioned, does a teacher walk up to you, they're up to here with a student and say, we've got to get these kids in a small group? Or is it based on data versus just, oh, I like to teach zones of regulation because it's fun? Is your data supporting that? So really considering what are some of those needs you can put for some of those smaller groups of students within your buildings. And of course, you know, for academic, you know, there's credit recovery. There's some ILP options for those tier 2 supports. If you've got students who are really struggling to figure out what are they good at? What skills do they have? What are their options post-secondary? Because we do know there's a lot of that. That's a tier 2 support for students. Versus you may do something different on top of that tier 1 you're already offering at your building. And then of course, how do you collaborate with all of your wraparound, you know, mentors, business partners, community-based people, because a lot of them, like you all mentioned, some of you are using them at that tier 1 level. At tier 2, where are they fitting in? Are they providing trainings? Are they helping see students based on whatever their services and their role is really supposed to offer? Hopefully not overtaking your role in seeing kids. We don't want that to happen at all. And then of course, they mentioned a lot about your interventions today is how are you creating your interventions as your team? It shouldn't just be you doing all this, but as a team, do you understand who's on that tier 2 team? Functions of behavior. What is it communicating? Trauma informed. And so that's a lot of conversation to consider when you think about your tier 2 and what does that look like for your students versus, like they mentioned, the blank check in, check out is not going to fit every kid. So I really liked how they, you know, really touched on that. And of course, peer mediators is an option to see a lot of your students who may need some extra supports with conflict resolution. And then of course, restorative practices. So you can kind of see gauging at your tier 2 level for some of those students who need that enhanced support. What types of meetings are you having? What types of consultations are you doing based on your expertise? ARC meetings do not fall in this. You're not chairing an ARC meeting as a tier 2 intervention or a support. No, it's an inappropriate duty. Absolutely not. So don't think about that. And I hope you didn't, but anyway, so as we go into our breakout rooms, these are some things to consider for those students who need that enhanced support.
Heather, I want to highlight that 10 to 15% of
Yes.
students receive services.
Mhm.
That is a suggested area, and it's not that you have to divide students in between these exact percentages, that kind of thing. However, if you see that your data are showing that 70–80% of your students would benefit from tier 2 support in something, most likely that would indicate that we need to put something that all of our students receive in tier 1. And then from our data, see who would need tier 2 services. It's to keep it manageable for our tier 2 supports. And as you think about it, it's not an exact, I have 80 to 85 in tier 1, 10 to 15 in tier 2, and then 3 to 5 in tier 3. And most of you probably know that, but I wouldn't want that to be where you're wondering, how do I get this percentage and all of that? But you want to think about it as some, and if it starts to reflect all, that's something for that team to come back and say, what do we need in our tier 1 to support all of our students?
Yeah. And to piggyback off that too, Melissa, it could be something systemic change to think about. It may not be the kid issue, it could be adult issue. So that would be something to consider. I know if you've heard me talk before about, as a counselor, you're going to look at your data, you're going to have these great ideas, but if it's a systemic issue of grading policies, or your policies about bullying, or about, how is PBIS, implemented, you have to look at that picture first to really figure out, is what I'm going to do, it'll make a difference with the students, but is it more of an adult systemic change issue versus we're going to focus on the students and then nothing's going to really change because of the systemic issue building wide. So just always consider that. So in our framework, I always like to reference this because I know we always get questions of, where do we fit in for interventions? What does that look like? Should we be doing academic interventions? So this is what the guidance is about, how you fit into interventions. Should you be teaching a reading intervention? No, but this is a lot about how you really, drive what's happening in your buildings with those team meetings. And that data to support, and the MTSS model, if it's followed the right way, you're going to be talking about all of these domains about your kids. So just as a reference, that's where interventions are mentioned within our framework, just for you to have. Okay, Dr. Wainwright, you want to talk about some of the different data?
My 2020 is coming back there for muting, unmute. You might want to bookmark these next 3 slides along with the one that Heather just talked about, because these provide some of the possible data sources that you would consider with your team, be it your school counseling MTSS group or your larger school group. Thinking about these academic sources of data are great places to make sure that they're incorporated into your review of data. The next slide has sources for behavior and social emotional. There would be others that are available there. And as you talk about tier 2, you may think of some of the data sources that you use for that. And then the last one is on school mental health data. And there are a lot of those there for your review, and just thinking about the various data sources and what data are going to be able to help you make an informed decision to meet the needs of all the students in your school.
Here are just some ideas for possible topics you might, have an idea about, or it might have, light bulb go off as you go into your groups about the different domains, and some topics to consider for your small groups that maybe you haven't tried before, or your data is not telling you that's an issue yet. But I know in different trainings I've done with some other colleagues, I know these are the ones that seem to be popping up the most. Lack of organization and self-management. And of course, keep in mind, as we think about our small groups with our students, we want to try to get away from the labeling. So versus like an angry group, let's focus more on self-management or self-awareness, because your students will start calling themselves, they're the angry kids, they have anger issues. So we really want to be careful of, if we're implementing small groups based on data, what are we calling it? And how do the kids perceive it when they do get to see you for the small group? So always kind of consider that, because we want it to be a safe space and not be another, label for them and others to see, oh, well, there they go, they're in the divorce group. Because for a lot of students, that would really have some outside issues happening when we're trying to be helpful and obviously serve our students. And of course, the 3 types of counseling, there's proactive counseling, based on your data, the kids pretty well every year. If you're not super transient, or even if you are, you have some of those kids in and out. Who do you know is going to need a check-in? Those kids who maybe once every couple of weeks need that 10-minute quick check-in, or just to say hi to you every morning, whatever it is. So that's more the proactive, like you want to get them before 5 steps later things start sparking up, and then you have more interventions, whereas you could have really proactively had a quick check-in for them, if not with you, with somebody else, just to make sure you're trying to decrease anything that could potentially happen. Crisis situations, of course, I hope most of you, unfortunately, with all the different happenings we've had in Kentucky with weather and of course COVID, and just the safety that's happening with our students right now, please make sure that there are protocols in place for you, especially as counselors, because when things happen, you're going to be the first one people come to and look to lead everything. And having protocols in place help you just to be proactive in knowing this is how things go, this is the system, this is what we do, just to kind of keep yourself as calm in situations like that as you are able to be, so then you can take care of yourself whenever that time comes. So just be considerate of that. Especially, because unfortunately we have to consider all of that with all of our staff, families, students. And then you're responsive. We are counselors for schools, so we do short-term counseling. So you need to think about, when you go into your breakout rooms, how do I know who gets to see me? I think that's always a big question. Is it whoever shows up at my door, whoever the teacher calls me about, putting out fires, or is it, do I have a system of students do this to get to come see me? They fill out a form, they do a Google form. There's a scan code in my building. And if there is a system, great. Is it working? Are you able to check it? Are you able to see your students? Because I think a lot of times we have systems, but then we don't get to see the kids for weeks, which means it's not working as well. So just consider, are you triaging which kids you're seeing first and within a week, within a month? Just kind of think about that as you go into your rooms to see if anybody has creative ideas of how they do that as well. Okay, we are ready for our second breakout room. So for the Jamboard, again, my facilitators, if you all would like to just be the only ones jumping in there to kind of type people's ideas, that's fine. If it's easier for you to take notes, however you want to do that, that's perfectly fine. The bigger picture here is we want to get everybody's ideas compiled together so we can then release that to everyone who got to join us today. So whatever that looks like, that's easier for you all to manage, just go for it. And we will have, let me look at our time. We'll do 15 minutes. So that way, if you had to finish up a little bit of your tier 1, but this time we're only going to focus on our tier 2, okay? Or you can finish a little bit of your tier 1 as well. Okay, so let me get them open. And again, if you need help joining a breakout room, just please let us know. We'll see you back in a few minutes. Okay. Okay, think everybody's coming back into the main room. Okay. I hope it went a little bit smoother this time. I hope. We love technology. Okay. We are in the home stretch. We have about a little bit over a half hour left. So does anybody want to share from your groups some of your tier 2 ideas for direct or your indirect services? Any highlights? You can type it in the chat or unmute yourself, because we would love to hear from you. There's everybody coming back. Okay, looks like now we have everybody back. Does anybody want to highlight something you heard from your group for indirect or direct service? Either put it in the chat, or we'd love for you to unmute and share with us.
So Heather, we had a lot of great ideas. So it's kind of hard to pick one. They talked about all their lunch bunches. They talked about your group sessions or coping sessions. I love the one about girl drama, study sessions, book clubs, assessments of students, and supporting the LGBTQ kids. So I mean, it was just SEL, it was CC, it was academic, and they went through all their different groups, along with some of the stuff that was on tier 1 moved to tier 2. So anyway, it was really a great discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else want to share something they heard that highlight anything?
We do have in the chat if the group that talked about the girl drama, there's a question about would someone elaborate upon that, either unmute or in the chat. I was noticing, Heather, as I looked through, some had a balance of direct and indirect, and some had a bit more of indirect than direct. And I think that's just a point of conversation for the groups and for individuals to go back to what you said earlier about the direct and indirect services, and the blue and yellow Post-its help us to see it real clearly.
Melissa,
Yes.
I think I accidentally didn't put the blue. I put it all in yellow. So some of it is really supposed to be blue.
Okay, well, I was not outing you in any way. I
outed myself.
We appreciate you, Brana. You're so funny.
And I've got a cookie.
Well, you should have brought 400 to share.
It's not that good. It's sugar-free, so hey.
But yeah, as we were looking at the different slides, it is interesting because and I like doing it color coded, because I think you do start to see where kind of your time is spent, and at the different levels as well. And of course, if we had more time, you all, like you said, all day you could have kept adding and adding. And I know some of you have mentioned you've seen some gaps, and oh wow, we're really not doing indirect as much with this domain, or seeing kids about maybe SEL as much as maybe we could, which I think is kind of the purpose, to not get so hung up on, like we've mentioned, the percentages, or trying to say, 33% of your time should be spent in academic, college, career, SEL. We really want to be careful of what is the data telling you, obviously, but then you don't want to get so hung up on all the meetings to where then you're not seeing your students, because you're going to probably have more meetings if you're not seeing your students. So I like how you all are being really honest and putting in there things that are happening, because that's how we grow, and that's why we're collaborating, so you can see what everybody else is doing around the state. Okay, well, we'll just jump into tier 3. Anything, Melissa, you want to say about tier 3 before we jump in?
I think the part I'm not, we talked about not belaboring the point of the layered model. That's just there for a reminder for people that this would be where we're talking about that intensive, individualized student support.
Yeah.
And in thinking about that, that's where it utilizes a lot of resources. And so we want to make sure that we've provided all of our students a really robust core, opportunities for tier 2 support before we utilize intensive support. There are obviously times where that is warranted, especially with school counselors. There are students that they need those intensive supports right away. And so please utilize your experience and judgment with that, but it's for the intensive individualized student.
And as we think about that, here is your tier 3 top of the triangle Kentucky model for school counseling. And like we kind of mentioned, you've got your percent. Hopefully not over 1 to 5% of your students are receiving these services, because these are your most intensive interventions and your services for these students. And I like how we keep reiterating it is a layered model. I think going back in the past, so many people still think of it as you go through the tiers and you're shoved into special ed or a 504 plan or, other services, to where that's not what this is meant to be. And so when we think about our tier 3, you are still very much a large part of the tier 3 conversation for your students who need these services. However, this may be where a lot more people come into play with serving your students. For example, we are not long-term counselors. So at some point we have to hand that off to somebody who is and who can offer that service, with our school-based mental health therapist, community-based, whatever we can have, if the student needs that. Different types of transition meetings for students coming back who may have been hospitalized or suspended. You may be part of those meetings to help figure out holistically, how do we help this child be successful in our building? Threat and risk assessments, and a lot of you all have have to do those, or collaborate with maybe your school psychologist or an administrator to do those. Different types of crisis management, like we've kind of discussed a while ago. And I know they mentioned this morning about the functional behavior assessments. A lot of times your school psychologist will help you do those, but if not, you may have to be the one to really start drilling down into, if a student needs this individualized support, really figuring out what is the function, short-term, long-term goals, observations, interviewing students, staff, families. So you're very much a part of that, but you don't necessarily have to be the one actually doing it, but you're a part of that conversation. So this is where, again, you have a lot more wraparound with your students, just to make sure as a counselor, you don't overstep your bounds to then become long-term counseling or a therapist, because we don't want that to happen. So like we mentioned, long-term counseling, no, that's not our role. And it is hard to let those students shift. Can you still check in with them? Absolutely. Because typically your therapist may not be there every day, all day, like we are. So you may need to check in with that student and have other people in your building make sure, if they like certain things, they're tagging onto that kid as maybe a check-in or a mentor, a leadership role. But not offering that service, though, for us is huge, because then your time's going to be spent on that versus your tier 1. And then we know what's going to happen. Tier 1 is going to start trickling those percentages way up in tier 2, which is what we don't want. Your wraparound services are imperative at tier 3. A lot of you, like you've mentioned, you're using some wraparound people at tier 1, and obviously at tier 2. But tier 3 is really where you want to bring in any stakeholder you can, to make sure our students are getting as many services as we can. And we know there's waiting lists and there's issues, things like that. But anything we can do to advocate for that at that tier 3 level is our role, and especially just talking with the team at the MTSS meetings. Okay, so we're going to go back one more time into our breakout rooms, and this time's going to be just a little bit shorter. We're going to have about 12 minutes. So again, my facilitators, if you don't mind, just jump in the Jamboard, or if you're just writing down notes, perfectly fine. But this will be the last breakout group. So anything else you would want to add to your Jamboard to make sure I can download everything into one large document just to send out. So you'll have a list of resources from around our state, ideas, activities, based on what we've done today, to have once we're finished. So let me stop sharing, and then you all can go to your breakout rooms one more time, and you'll have about 12 minutes. As we're coming back, does anybody want to share for the tier 3 services or interventions, anything you heard that you would like to share with our entire group, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself?
Our group talked about having a lot of problems with outside services, you know, just a lot of turnaround, and they just struggle with that area. So, you know, that's obviously what you would use in tier 3, but they're having trouble some getting people into the schools and just coming up with resources for that population.
I agree. I think that's an issue that's around the state right now, and not just ours, but others. But I know in Kentucky especially, that's, yeah, it's a struggle to, number one, get on a waiting list, or just to even be seen within so many months. And then there's other maybe issues happening as well. So yes, it's a struggle. And I think that's considerate of tier 3. If we're not able to use community-based agencies like we would like for them to, then what do we do? You know, we have to think about how do we wrap around those students as best as we can at the school level, until an opening happens, or, you know. So I know that, so that is a need, absolutely. Doesn't mean we start long-term counseling either. However, you know, there's some wraparound we can do at school the best we can, just to make sure to keep those kids safe and have as many needs met, you know, as possible. So yes, for sure, a concern. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share?
I'll mention some at the high school level. And this is at Franklin County. Some of the tier 3 things that we offer academically, and I think this is particularly high, and I'm sure it's not just at our school, but other schools as well, the number of students needing to repeat classes. But we use the online credit recovery programs, but we kind of use a rule of thumb that if a student is 3 credits behind, then we meet with, you know, we talk with the student and the family, but we put them into an hour of credit recovery to help academically get back on track. So we call that flex, those class periods where they work on credit recovery. So that's for some of our higher need academic, you know, they've fallen behind academically, those students. From the, you know, social emotional, we use the IOP program, the intensive outpatient program. So we work in conjunction with some counseling programs or community resources for that. And then also from the behavior aspect, we have the PASS program for some of our higher need behavior students.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Great. Anybody else? Okay, well, feel free to put anything in the chat that you thought we would want others to hear. I know, because we're about to be finished. So
Yes,
okay.
yes, we are. And to wrap things up in relation to this tiered delivery model, thinking about our students that receive tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 supports, interventions, it's fluid, meaning, or it can change. And there are some arrows that I think will be coming on, maybe not. There we go. That a student may move through the tiers, and then they may, our goal is that they are able to transition out of the tier also. And I think that was highlighted this morning, that our goal is not to keep them in these tiered supports of tier 2 or tier 3. Our goal is to help the student, equip the student with the skills and tools they need to be successful, to be able to be back in tier 1 where they have their needs met in that tier 1 instruction for all students. Just be mindful of that the arrows can go up into a tier as well as come out of a tier and back into another one. And the other, just for reference for you, there are a lot of resources on KYMTSS, and that link there to the website is there. And I'm going to be looking at your Jamboard and seeing if there are some resources that we want to add to that. And thank you for time to meet with you today. And I appreciate the cooperatives for their work with supporting MTSS. Each cooperative has an MTSS point of contact that is there to support you, as well as FTL specialists from the CRISA team. There are lots of ways to have support. And thank you to the co-ops for being a part. I know Heather started our day off with that. We could not do it without your support, and we appreciate you. And we appreciate each of the school counselors here today that have powered through a lot of material, but a lot of great resources.
All right, so let's think about next steps as we're closing for our sessions today. I have added the feedback form into the chat. So this is, of course, for me and Dr. Wainwright as we move forward with this training that we've created. And then I know we have already discussed how this 2-hour training essentially is going to get broken down into, I think, 5 other trainings potentially, just to really dig down into the weeds a little bit. Some future trainings we were discussing as we were creating this was just, a training about how do you know what to teach at tier 1? How are you using the ASCA student mindset standards? Because a lot of us maybe haven't seen that, know what it is, or if you do, are you using it? So we were talking about using data to drive your tier 1. That's, a training in itself is just really looking at really the numbers, and then our street data and what we're doing for our students with all the different types of data that they share this morning we were looking at. And of course, you get into tier 2 and tier 3, just forming and sustaining a small group. That's a whole system in itself, right? Is figuring out data we're looking at. How do you form a group? What do you teach? How do you progress monitor? How do you know that they've got the skills you want them to have? So, and then of course, what data, how do we dig into that to know what's driving tier 2 and tier 3? And then the interconnected systems framework. How are we using all of these school-based mental health providers that, a lot of us seem to have now with therapists, social workers, our school psychologists? How are we all collaborating, staying in our lane, but also collaborating where we are serving our schools the best we could be based on what our role is and how we see kids. So anything like that, and any other ideas that maybe came to you today on the feedback form, if you want to put your email and just let us know, because for me, Melissa, there are going to be some things we consider doing like in a webinar form. Of course, we'll use our co-ops who are amazing, as always, to work with, just to kind of move forward in this process, because today was a very broad overview. It really was, between your national information you got in the morning, and now you see the Kentucky information. Well, now what's next? So how do we take this and go? So this is just the start of this process. And then who else needs to hear the information from today? We do not want you to be siloed at all, but this would be great information to take back to administrators, to your districts. Obviously, it's going to be released publicly as soon as it gets through all the process in our state world. And we are going to be talking to administrators and superintendents about this is your school counselor's recommendations for MTSS, and this is how they are a part of the conversation, a part of the teams, because we do want to advocate for your role and how you are serving students and how important you are in all of these conversations that we've had today, because sometimes they may not know. So please fill out the feedback form. And then just to finish us up, we have our last cadre of the year, school year at least, on June 6th. So mark the date. It'll be 9 to 12. It'll be, of course, our half day like we usually do. ELA credit will be awarded. So if you last minute need 3 hours, then you're going to get it on June 6th. We have John Burnett, who is a school counselor, and I have seen him on social media. He has a YouTube channel. He's very engaging, and I reached out to him about he is rethinking how to discuss self-care. Sometimes it's overgeneralized, I feel like now, because everybody's like, oh, you just need self-care. Great. What does that even look like, especially for counselors, when we're the experts teaching everybody else how to do it? So he's going to join us for a couple of hours just to focus on how do we rethink self-care to be more purposeful, not only for counselors, but he's also going to give us strategies to do with our stakeholders, your staff, your students, your families. So I'm really excited to have him kind of almost help us rethink more purposefully, how are we looking at self-care and just, with all these different stakeholders, just to help us get, more skill sets, but number one, to take care of ourselves, because if you don't take care of yourself, it's hard to take care of other people. We know that. So he'll be joining us June 6th. And of course, we'll have some collaborative time during that 3 hours as well. So save that date. And then I'm going to put one more form into your chat. Let me get it copied real fast. This form is for ideas for our next cadre year. We have got dates already set tentatively. Those will be released soon for everyone. I know our co-ops have those, but what has helped this year to make sure we are meeting your needs is your feedback. Every training that I know I've had the pleasure of collaboratively scheduling with national leaders, our KDE state leaders, yourselves, has been topics you all put that you want. So please fill that out, because we are gathering feedback. I'm starting to plan for this coming year of what you need the most for Kentucky to help you do your jobs, to be experts in whatever you want to be, to help grow. So please fill that out, because the more of you that fill it out, then we can make sure we really get trainings that you all are needing and that you're wanting, just to help you be a school counselor, because you're amazing. So before we leave, we're actually getting done a little bit early, so this is nice. In the chat, if you would, just type something in from this afternoon. You've already done the morning. What's something that just kind of is a highlight for you from this afternoon? Either something you realize you're really doing well, or something you would like to grow on. So just type in the chat real fast. Any reflections from today? The girl drama group. Yeah, that was popular today. Okay. Okay. Yes. So whoever wrote the girl drama on your Jamboard, you are being requested by about 4 or 5 people. I don't know who you are, but Please, if you want to reach out to me, I will be happy to put your email in the Jamboard resources. We need to shout out your genius. Obviously, you have an amazing idea. People are wanting. You might consider presenting at our School Counselors Association conference in September. Just a thought. Proposals are open. Okay. Wow. This is amazing. Expanding tier 2. Okay.
That's a great comment.
Wow. Okay. Well, we cannot thank you all enough. We always know this is a full day. It's a long day. Hopefully, this year was a little bit better. Last year, I know we went till 5. So hopefully this year was a little bit better. But having a little bit of a longer time allowed us to let you all collaborate more. That's the perk of having a longer day, is our 3-hour cadres are so fast. This allows us to take time just to statewide, have you all mix up together and see what everybody's doing. It is so important and valuable for our school counseling collaboration. I will take all the Jamboard resources. We'll get those downloaded. And then the recordings will be on my KDE counselor website within the next few days. They typically come pretty quick. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And you will also have a resource guide with all of the links from School Counselors for MTSS, and anything for our slides from our presentation this afternoon. You will have those. And as soon as that other document is completely finished, it will be public as well for you to have. So we thank you all so much for joining us today. And as always, email us if you need anything. Our information is on the slides. But we'll help and navigate anything you need. And please enjoy the rest of your school counselor week. So thank you all for joining us.